DataArt is a global software engineering firm with a uniquely human approach to solving problems. We have teams of highly trained engineers with over 20 years of experience. Everyone upholds a deep understanding of the industry sector through ongoing technology research. People first. Relationships are the foundation of long-term value generation. We hire people for the long haul. Projects change, but our employees remain with us. Commitment to people is the main and absolute value for DataArt. DataArt doesn't have a rigid hierarchy with a single leader. The flat and decentralized organizational structure is beneficial to DataArt's flexibility. DataArt's organizational structure is based around projects. We enjoy flexible schedules, vacations, and work locations, both at different developmental sales and centers, or from home. DataArt is built around people who want to earn a living using their professional skills and talents with minimal limitations on their personal freedom. A lot of people are happy to work for DataArt and stay with us for many years. They have the opportunity to learn, gain experience, and grow. Join DataArt. DataArt is a global software engineering firm with a uniquely human approach to solving problems. We have teams of highly trained engineers with over 20 years of experience. Everyone upholds a deep understanding of the industry sector through ongoing technology research. People first. Relationships are the foundation of long-term value generation. We hire people for the long haul. Projects change, but our employees remain with us. Commitment to people is the main and absolute value for DataArt. DataArt doesn't have a rigid hierarchy with a single leader. The flat and decentralized organizational structure is beneficial to DataArt's flexibility. DataArt's organizational structure is based around projects. We enjoy flexible schedules, vacations, and workshops, both at different developmental sales and centers, or from home. DataArt is built around people who want to earn a living using their professional skills and talents with minimal limitations on their personal freedom. A lot of people are happy to work for DataArt and stay with us for many years. They have the opportunity to learn, gain experience, and grow. Join DataArt.
Здравейте всички! Надявам се, че ме чувате. Добре дошли на българското издание на Dotnet конференцията, която правим като реплей на събитието, което е направено в началото на ноември. Днеска сме поканили няколко участника за коментар по съответно новите функционалности на .NET. Здравей, Радо!
Здравей, Мишо! Здравейте на всички хора, които са там в залата и на тези, които са онлайн. И благодаря за
Много се
поканата.
радвам, че си с нас отново и ще се радвам, ако можеш да кажеш някакви коментари от твоя страна по отношение на последните функционалности, които бяха предложени в Visual Studio 2022 и .NET 6.
Така. Ами, доста неща излязоха сега, за които съм доста развълнуван. Може би опита ми с .NET тръгна преди, може би, повече от 10 години. От тогава доста неща се измениха. По отношение на .NET 6, доста performance improvement се забелязват, както и с всяка версия. .NET 6 вече е long-term support версия и нещо много важно, с него вече имаме C# 10, който има доста нови интересни фичери, като например Global Using Directives. Не знам колко от вас преди им се е налагало да разчитат на Visual Studio да им портва юзингите, но това е един от бутоните, който при мен е изтъркан на клавиатурата и който аз най-често ползвах. Сега в C# 10 и .NET 6 вече можем да си дефинираме един глобален файл с всички юзинги, които да важат в целия проект. И също този фичър дава възможност и SDK проектите, които импортваме в нашия проект и те да от своя страна пък да импортват глобални юзинг директиви и по този начин юзингите, които ползваме от гледна точка на фреймворка, вече почти изчезват. От гледна точка на самия код, това е пространство, което вече може да го ползваме за нашия си код, вместо за някакви boilerplate редове, които само импортват някакви неща. Следващото нещо е file scope namespace декларациите. Като цяло не е нужно вече да си рапвате цял код блок, за да дефинирате кой е namespace на текущия код. Това може да го направите в началото на файла, което спестява както хоризонтално, така и вертикално разстояние в индентацията. И третото, може би важно нещо за мен, и което на мен ми е интересно, е всъщност, че lambda expression-ите вече имат return type, като той бива може да е инфърнат от самата платформа или да е explicit, т.е. ние да го декларираме. И също lambda expression-ите вече съпортват атрибути, такива, които могат да се аплайват на методи, което всъщност означава, че ламдите все повече се доближават до методите и локалните функции. Това е по отношение на C# 10. За Visual Studio 2022 аз може би съзнателно ползвам Visual Studio от 2010 насам, въпреки че имаме и кратък опит с Visual Basic 6.0, където изискваше доста по-стара версия на Visual Studio. Но в сравнение с 2010, която е една от първите така стабилни версии, виждам доста нови импрувменти в Visual Studio 2022. Вече UI е такъв модерен, доста добре се вписва и с Windows 11. Performance импрувментите също са значителни, като вече Visual Studio 2022 е 64-битов application, т.е. не трябва да ви притеснява колко голям е вашия проект, защото той ще успее да го зареди. И може би последното нещо, което искам да спомена е за поддръжката на няколко репота. Понеже в един solution може да имаме съвкупност от репота, всяко от които идва от различни, т.е. съвкупност от проекти, всеки от които идва от различни репозиторита. Visual Studio вече се справя с няколко репозитори наведнъж, но това все още е превю фичър, който трябва да влезете и да си пуснете.
Да, благодаря ти, Радо. Тук сме поканили също и Ники Павлов, който е добре известен в нашото комюнити, един от най-активните хора в Пловдив и също така заместник декан на факултета по математика и информатика към Пловдивския университет. Здравей, Ники!
Здравей, Мишо! Благодаря ти за представянето.
Какви са според теб най-интересните неща в новото издание на Dotnet 6, които ще са интересни за нашите разработчици и за комюнитито като цяло?
Аз няма да повтарям това, което вече Радо отбеляза, безспорно важни неща. Ще допълня, за мен е много важно в Dotnet 6 оптимизациите на скорост, които са направили и рефакторинга на кода на вътрешни нива. На пръв поглед това не са фичери, които ще ни донесат нови възможности, нови функции в библиотеките, но показва сериозно отношение на Microsoft да стабилизират кодбейса, да изчистят много стари неща, да преработят функционалност, която не е работила много добре и се е получил малко леер върху леер, и постигат изключително добри резултати в производителността на кода. Изключително много са подобренията, даже не може да ги изброим тук тази вечер. Обхващат както библиотеката, така just-in-time компилатора. Друго нещо, което ми харесва е вниманието, което се отдава на разширяването на SP Core посока поддръжка на HTTP 3, нещо, което ще се налага и ще стане част от стандарта, и новите възможности в Blazer. Blazer за .NET разработчиците, които не искаме да преминаваме към JavaScript и да разработваме Single Page Applications, но които все още имаме пазар за Enterprise и Line of Business приложения за интранет употреба, Blazer да се очертава една страхотна технология за миграция на стари MVC Web Forms приложения към един познат модел, без да се налага да се усвояват нови умения. Аз лично участвам в екип, където и пускаме в продакшън втори портал на Blazer и за сега сме много доволни от резултата, който получаваме, скоростта на писане на код и това, което се получава. Искам да отбележа и още нещо, което се появи тези дни, съвпадна с релиза на .NET 6.0, но не получи внимание подобаващо. То е отделен сервис и това е WinUI 3, част от Windows Application Sdk. Най-накрая Microsoft направиха поредната си стъпка към създаване на нещо ново за десктоп разработчиците. Да, десктопът не е модерен в наши дни, никой не желае да пише десктоп, ако има такава възможност, но все още има доста use кейсове, където това се налага. След като няколко години беше доста тъмно и неясно, ако човек трябва да започне да пише ново или да модернизира едно десктоп приложение, как да го направи, сега най-накрая се появява roadmap за такава технология. И най-голямото предимство, което има там е, че освен, че се поддържат .NET 5 и 6 последните версии, имаме библиотека, която отделя потребителския интерфейс от операционната система, което да ни гарантира, че от тук нататък каквито и нови възможности Microsoft да разработват за десктоп, те ще работят дори на по-стари версии на Windows.
Да, благодаря ти много, Ники, и благодаря и на тебе, Радо. Ние сме подготвили няколко избрани презентации за това събитие от премиерата на .NET 6. Става дума за Minimal API, една от интересните възможности да имате много упростен API с Minimum Dependency, най-новите функционалности на C# 10 и една функционалност, която е много удобна за активен development, Hot Reload. Една от интересните, поне за мен, функционалности, която не бива да се пропуска. Какво ще пожелаете на нашите участници преди да започнем стриминга? Радо?
Аз бих им пожелал да следят с интерес нещата, които ще видят в тези видеа, защото са наистина удобни и е наистина добре да бъдеш девелопър, който може да ги ползва в наши дни. Защото знаем, че преди не беше толкова лесно.
Абсолютно. Ники, ти?
Аз ще им пожелая да имат възможност по-скоро да използват всички тези нови плагини, защото знаете, новостите са си новости, но не винаги имаме възможност да мигрираме проекти или технология. Така че стискам палци да може наистина тези удобства и предимства скоро да ви влязат в употреба.
Благодаря ви много. Ние сме в офиса на Data Art, които са нашия любезен хост, тъй като събитието е хибридно, т.е. всеки участник, който има COVID документ, може да дойде в офиса и да пие биричка и съответно да гледа тези презентации. Благодаря много на Data Art за съдействието и всичко, което правят за нашето комюнити и се надявам още много пъти да имаме една такава интересна работа и да правим съвместни ивенти. Благодаря ви още веднъж и приятно гледане!
Приятно гледане!
.NET Conf, and thank you for watching. And today I'm going to talk to you all about .NET Hot Reload. This project is something that I've been working on for a very long time, over a year, and it's really great to see us hit the first huge milestone, the first GA. I was so excited, I even went and made like a little sun and a little .NET person sitting on the beach because it's that hot. We're that excited to bring this technology to you. And let's go jump in. So today will be about diving deep into the details. It's something that I have not had the pleasure to do before, really. I've had lots of talks where I did demos and live streams, but I've never really been able to tell you every little detail. And to be fair, those details have been changing over time. But finally, we're GA, so there's a concrete thing that I can describe to you of like what it works, what doesn't work, and I'm really going to try to answer all of your questions as they go down. There will be some demos, and if I have lots of time, we'll do more demos. I have like a bunch of instances of ES running on my machine. We'll see how many of them I get to, at least two. We'll take a look, and we'll take a look at CLI as well. So let's go ahead and jump right into the introduction. So what is Hot Reload? I'm never like to make the assumption having a talk where I think you know what I'm about to demo. So instead of assuming, I'm going to describe it to you and describe an important aspect of the technology that sometimes is not 100% clear to people. So I want to make sure that it is clear to you when you walk away from this presentation. So first of all, what is the goal of Hot Reload technology in Visual Studio? The goal is quite simple. You as a developer probably spend a lot of time today going from a point of your day when you're just coding to when you're running your application to see what all that code is doing, right? So you spend time building, you spend time deploying potentially, you definitely spend time navigating in an app to a certain state that you want to test certain capabilities, and then you sometimes find a problem, right? You find a bug, you find some code that you forgot to implement, you're stuck, and normally you would have to shut down the app, go make your code change, and start that process all over again. And that's where we saw an opportunity to make your life a bit better. And that's where Hot Reload came about. Now, Hot Reload itself is based on edit and continue. So we've had the ability for you to put a breakpoint in your code, and at that breakpoint, make a bunch of changes. Now that's great, but it's not super productive because you constantly have to, go and put the breakpoint down and then try to hit the breakpoint before you can make changes. Instead, we're just letting you make changes and keep applying them to your running application. Now here's the next important bullet point on my slide, and that's what happens after the code change is applied. So you applied the code change, and now you have to execute it again. This is sometimes confusing, so I try to make this very clear when I talk about it, which is Hot Reload is never going to execute code for you. It will apply changes to your running application. So you have an app that's been compiled already, and we're changing that app in runtime, right, in memory. And after the change is made, you have to execute the code somehow. So you either have to do some kind of UI gesture or some kind of timer in your app has to activate, but something has to happen. So that's the second bullet right there. That's super, super important. I've had people tell me, well, this code, seemed like it applied, but now it's not working. Why is it not working? Well, can you get to it somehow, right? Can you make it execute? Well, no, but can you guys make it execute for us? And we really can't. We can't just run arbitrary code. So hopefully with those two steps in mind of like make the code change and re-execute, you can kind of understand how this feature is supposed to work. So that's at the high level. But then we're going to describe one more mechanism. We're going to show you one more slide before I go into my first demo. And this slide is all about what happens when you make a change that's valid. So you go ahead and you make a code change. And now, as you can see on my slide, there's a bunch of things that could pop up on your screen if that code is not something we can support to apply at runtime. Let me give you an example. Renaming methods today is not supported. So if you go and you have an existing method and you need to change it from method A to method A2 or something like that, you're going to get one of these dialogues. And there's two dialogues today. It's kind of an annoying, unfortunate reality. There's one, the first one on top of this slide. That one is what you get when you're running F5. And the one on the bottom is what happens if you're using Control F5 with a .NET 6 app. That second dialog is actually much nicer because it lets you automatically, like with one click, rebuild the app and reapply the code change and restart the app. So it goes through that cycle for you. It also can just do that every time you hit a root edit if that's something you want. That's especially cool in web scenarios. Not as useful in desktop scenarios, but in web it's very useful. So we've made this improved dialog, and we only, in this release 17.0, had time to implement it on the no debugger debugger scenario. But we're going to fix that. We'll talk about 17.1 and stuff later on this presentation. But I wanted to show you these things because they're the foundation. If you can understand what a root edit is, in other words, like a valid code change, but you have to restart because the pipeline for hot reload doesn't support applying it. And if you understand the whole, like you have to re-execute your code in order for it to be run again, then you really understand hot reload at all the fundamental levels. And we can go right into my demo. So let's go ahead and jump in. I'm going to go ahead and switch to Visual Studio, one of my Visual Studios. And here, let's talk about how hot reload works. So I have a WPF app, just, there's nothing special about WPF. In a bit, we're going to talk about all the different platforms we support, project types, etc. But WPF is an easy example for me. So I'm going to start my application. And before I look at my app, which clearly needs some help because it started off very, very empty, we're going to go ahead and look at the Visual Studio UI. So let me zoom in and show you the new button. Hot Reload is an experience that can work in two ways. You can either have this button that you click on to apply the code change that you've made, or you can do it on save. I know people have wanted this feature, so we've made it available. And if you click this little drop-down button, we give you an option. It's opt-in. There's all sorts of reasons why we decided not to make it on by default. But basically, you have two ways for you to apply your code change to your running app. Either click the button. Alt F10 is the shortcut for that button, so you can press Alt F10 as well. Or you can say hot reload and save. And then whenever you save, you're going to apply those code changes. So this is really the whole user interface in Visual Studio today, except for the settings panel, right? So if you go in here, you've got all the options. We also have a restart button. And you're going to wonder why in Visual Studio now has two restart buttons, right? They're both restart. We've had this one on the right for a while. This button was added because we support, with .NET 6, the no debugger scenario. So we can actually launch a bunch of apps for you from Visual Studio without debuggers. You press Control F5 or you click the no debugger button, and we can actually restart that app as part of hot reload because we have an agent in there, and that's how we apply the magic of hot reload. So this second button here makes that possible. This first button on the right would not have done that for you. So we're trying to put like all the hot reload capabilities in one place so you can access it quickly, and there you have it. So that's the whole UI. And let's go actually into the demo itself and talk about like how do we use hot reload. So here's my contrived scenario. Of course, it's contrived. This is a conference, right? I have a little app here. It's called the Air Quality Sample. You probably have seen me, if you've seen other demos, show this app. But it's a great app because it lets me show the flow that feels very real to me. So here I have an application that started, and it's blank. And that's not what I expected. So normally, I would have to shut this app down and then make a code change and restart the app. And in a real world app, that could be 5 minutes, right? Or 10 minutes, or even 30 seconds. It's just very painful over and over and over. So now instead, I'm going to go jump into my code. I'm going to open up my view model and try to see what's going on. So so I didn't actually implement any of this code. Imagine this method was empty. It was there for you, but just completely empty. That would be very unfortunate. Now, hot reload doesn't really care whether you type or you uncomment. So I'm going to uncomment just so you folks, you don't need to see me type, right? Like this is just the same operation. Imagine that I would have typed all of this code in, and now I have a service class being created. I get results from it. I make sure those results are not null. I go through the process of the MVVM stuff. I clear the collection. I add items to a collection so that gets applied to the screen. So all of that is going to be now possible to do in my app. And all I have to do is click this little hot reload button. But even better, right? I don't have to click the button. I'm just going to hit save on my keyboard, and that's it. Hot reload happened. I'm going to go and show you one more thing. In my output window, there's a new category called hot reload. And if you're wondering what's going on with hot reload, definitely come here and take a look. And here, as you can see, the update was applied successfully. Let's actually prove that it was. Let me go press my refresh button, and I'm getting a change in my app's behavior. Now, if this was done only on startup, like if this list was only ever loaded on startup, this would be a problem, right? This is the whole, like, you have to re-execute the code thing that I was talking about earlier. But luckily, in this scenario, like in many apps, there's some interface that you can interact with. So now we have another problem. This is really strange in my app. I have this really long city name string. What is that all about? Oh, I remember. I was testing really long strings, right? This is just a very common thing. You might even have like healthy mock data like I do that populates this list, but I actually want to test scenarios such as like, will too many letters break my UI or whatever? So I made something in there. I remember now. Let me go take a look at it. So I'm going to go back into my air quality service. And yeah, in fact, I put a to-do here. My bad. I forgot to change it. Well, actually, this wasn't breaking my UI. But what if I add like a lot more dots? I'm going to do that. I'm going to hit save. I'm going to go back to my application. So I made a change somewhere else. All right, so see, it's surviving, it's expanding. That's pretty cool. My app is resilient. But all right, let's get rid of this thing. We never meant to have it in the first place. I'm going to delete it. I'm going to hit save. And let's take a look at the real data. I'm going to switch back to my app. And there you have it. I'm actually getting the right data. So that's the power of Hot Reload. All of those operations, if I kept discovering them one by one, I would have had to shut down, make the changes, just very, very painful. So now we make that really, really easy for you with Hot Reload. And I want to show you that I was working across a shared component, and I have, my app, and I could have had like a bunch of apps running. I could have had this shared component used from a WinForms app and a WPF app and ran both of them and made a change, and all of that stuff works. Like you can, whatever you can run and attach your debugger to, all of that will work. And for .NET 6, even when you're not using the debugger. So that's kind of the first demo. Now, in this part of the demo, I really stayed in the client space, right? I'm still in the client app. But I want to show you that you don't have to stay in the client app, right? You can expand out to another project. So here I have yet another project. I have a service that I built. And this service, I'm going to start it, is where eventually, it's still mock data in the service, but eventually this is where the real data is going to come back. The real air quality data is going to come back from. So I ran the service. It's on the port I expect, et cetera. OK, great. So let's go back to my application that I accidentally shut down. But that's just an accident. No demo is perfect. Imagine the app never shut down. This would have totally still worked. All right, there's my app is still running. We're in make-believe land. Dimitri didn't press the wrong button. And let's go back to my view model. So now let's go ahead and make one more change. Let's go actually use the service. And let's actually be a little wilder about this. Let me run this without the debugger. How about we do that? I'm going to run this app, start without debugging. That's a button right here. It's always been in Visual Studio for the longest time. I'm going to start this WPF app without debugger. Look how quickly it started. It didn't have to do anything with the debugger. My app is running, but now I'm going to make yet another change. I'm going to copy some code here that I have for calling the service. And I'm going to make the change right here. I'm going to comment this line out. And I'm going to paste a bunch of code in. On comment.code, what is this code doing? Well, it's an async code, so let me add async to my method. All right, so now I have a client that's going to be called, and the client will go and return my data here. Does not exist. My bad. I cut and paste one line less that I should have. For a demo, this is going pretty good. All right, everything is good. So now I'm going to once again press the magical Control Save. I'm going to go back to my app, and I'm going to hit refresh one more time. And now I'm hitting a breakpoint, right? So I just ran my WPF app without the debugger. I continued to use Hot Reload, and I was able to add a bunch of calls to a web service that will now return the data. So let's get rid of this breakpoint and take a look at the data it's returning. And you know how I mentioned that it was mock data on the other side? Well, I sort of did a bad thing. I cut and pasted some code earlier, and this bug therefore cut and pasted along with me. Oops, my bad. Really real world, right? I'm really hitting it home here. I'm going to go back into my service now and get rid of that. So I'm going to fix it by removing the code. And once again, I'm going to hot reload the service, the web API, .NET 6, and now everything is great. So we went and we did a lot of hot reloading. We use F5, Control F5. All of that is really awesome. So I'm going to go ahead and switch back to my slides and continue to talk to you about the details of what makes all of this possible. So let's deep dive. So that demo hopefully gives you an understanding of the end-to-end experience. But now let's go slide by slide and talk about what works and what doesn't work. So in this release, in Visual Studio 2022 17.0 release and .NET 6, Hot Reload is available in two places. It's available in Visual Studio 2022. It's available in the debugger for a very broad range of applications. It even works with C++ with the debugger. So .NET, C++, and when I talk about .NET, it works with different versions of .NET. But then if you're targeting a .NET 6 app, we support the magic of no debugger that I just showed you earlier. So that works for web apps, that works for client apps like WPF and WinForms and console. It has a bunch of capability, and we have a lot of those details in the docs. And then, as part of .NET 6, you don't just get things like the Visual Studio experience, Control F5. You get support for a bunch of more capabilities that are just not available anywhere else. So let me be very clear about it. Right, we're deep diving. Let's say you're using the debugger and you're working against a .NET 5 app, and the .NET 5 app has a razer page. Unfortunately, that razer page will not support Hot Reload. The code behind of a regular ASP.NET page will, or a web API, or a WPF app. So we support a lot of things, but razer is special. Razer, Blazer, .NET Maui, CSS Hot Reload, all of that is part of .NET 6. If you can target .NET 6, you're going to get what I have sometimes called like the most optimized Hot Reload or the best Hot Reload. You pick the words you want to use there, but truly today we've made a lot of things possible, and then there's like a scale of what's possible where, so to speak. So .NET 6 and Visual Studio 2022 together give you really the most powerful Hot Reload capability. And when you talk about capability, it's important to talk about what we can support in terms of the kind of edits we can do. So let's roll back to a comment I made a little bit earlier, which is Hot Reload is based on the edit and continue technology that's been in Visual Studio for a very long time, and that has been powering core CLR editing and continue capabilities. That means that as we make Hot Reload available, core CLR has the most complete, sort of like the widest amount of edits you can do. But we wanted to make this work in mono as well. By mono, I mean iOS scenarios and Android for .NET Maui and Blazer WASM. And to do that, we had to start somewhere. So we've, in this release in .NET 6, added method body replacement. And it certainly isn't going to give you the most powerful Hot Reload ever, but it's going to give you at least some capability to edit the app while it's running. And Scott Hunter, earlier in the keynote and Q&A, said this: we're going to continue to invest into Hot Reload. So we're going to make mono support more edits. We're going to make core CLR support more edits. This is a very complicated technology. I'll be very frank with you. There's a lot of moving pieces, a lot of teams involved. I often say over 10 teams to make Hot Reload possible. It is true. I can list them to you. It's not a made-up number. I have counted. I think it's more like 11. But all of this is available in this release as a starting point, and we need to hear from you where the edges are that are hurting you the most, because we want this to be a productivity gain. The way that I look at it is even some supported edits is a productivity gain. But if you're really feeling like your flow is not improved by Hot Reload, let me know. I'm available on Twitter. You can file VS feedback issues. You can go to the Roslyn GitHub issue, file feedback items there. I will find them. I will be told of them if I don't catch them. And we will try to make this really the best possible tech for you in the future. Now, another common question is supported languages in .NET. VB and C# are supported. Anywhere that edit and continue naturally supported it in the past. So from that perspective, we do have different limitations depending on C# and VB. And of course, we want to hear your feedback. Let us know what is or isn't working for you well. But those are the two languages that we support. Now, another thing that I want to say is just there's something omitted here, which is F# on the list. People have asked me, is Hot Reload available for F#? Unfortunately, no. If you believe that's something that should happen, please let the F# team know. They were just speaking a minute ago, Don and Kathleen, lots of good folks there, friends of mine. I'd love to give them Hot Reload, but it's going to take a team effort. So we need to make sure it's valuable to the community. And every release is a new opportunity. Supported projects. Another question I get all the time: what will Hot Reload work with my project? And this list is pretty extensive. We support from console to WPF to WinForms to ASP.NET. There is a bunch of things here tagged with .NET 6. So those things are razer pages, CSS Hot Reload, Blazer, and .NET Maui. All of that requires you to be on VS22 with .NET 6 with a .NET 6 app. But we work almost anywhere edit and continue used to work. So if you're using the debugger and you're running an app that's running in core CLR, give Hot Reload a try. It's probably going to work with your project type. Like, I encourage everyone to do that. And if it doesn't, if something is weird, let us know. We will try to make it better for you. All right, unsupported. Another thing here worth going down the list, right? So we built this slide not to be 100% complete, but it has a lot of the information. So, one example, which actually bites people all the time, so I want to call it out first, which is you need to be in the debug configuration. That's where all the magic is wired up. If you have a custom configuration that you run your app with, or if you try and release, hot reload's not going to be available. I also get the question of like, why is hot reload not available in release? Because it's a debug technology. We truly want it to be something that improves your debug inner loop. We do not want you to take it to production. This tech is basically safe for development, and we are not making it supported for release scenarios. So we don't enable it in release scenarios. And if you somehow make it work in release, maybe you can find some switches to make it work, but like please stick to debug is my recommendation. We also have limitations on optimized applications. This is two examples, trimming and ready to run. If you enable either one of those, hot reload today will just not work. In fact, we found a late bug, ready to run, doesn't give you the clearest error message, clearest experience. But again, you shouldn't be running that in the debug build. You can make it so it's conditional for your release build. You can turn it off if you just want to use hot reload. Basically, have it off. Don't use trimming. Don't use ready to run, and we'll improve those error messages and such over time. Make it as clear as possible from the application itself. Another thing is about .NET Native Runtime, and this confuses UWP developers because when you're in debug with UWP, it's not really .NET Native as the debug runtime. So there is some limited hot reload support for a UWP dev even today because ENC is supported there for certain scenarios. But if you are truly building a .NET Native app somehow, we're not going to support that as a runtime. And then, of course, F# I mentioned earlier. F# on the list. We don't support that either. And then for Xamarin Forms projects, this is, again, a bit confusing for people, so let me break it down. Xamarin Forms today supports another hot reload technology that we have called Xaml Hot Reload. So Xaml Hot Reload has been around for a long time. It is the ability to change an app's UI if the app is built using XAML. Examples include Xamarin Forms, WPF, WinUI, UWP. All of those are XAML platforms, and that technology is not going anywhere. Whenever I talk about .NET Hot Reload, I'm truly talking just about .NET Hot Reload. When I talk about its limitations, where it is or isn't supported, I am not trying to make statements about XAML Hot Reload. They share a similar name. I am the PM for both, so you can blame me for all the problems. But it doesn't have the same limitations, right? So Xamarin Forms customers continue to have XAML Hot Reload. If XAML Hot Reload isn't working for you, file a bug. XAML Hot Reload is as you type, so you never have to click a button, you never have to save. All the things I showed for .NET Hot Reload, those are .NET Hot Reload specific isms. And if you're doing XAML Hot Reload, it works the way it's always worked, which is as you type. As soon as you hit a valid XAML syntax, we change it in your running application. Unfortunately, Xamarin Forms is not going up to .NET 6, and that's why we will not have Hot Reload. Hot Reload for mobile scenarios is very complicated. Multiple runtimes, the Windows desktop, iOS, Android, macOS for Catalyst. It's very complicated, so we've had to make a bunch of investments to make it work in all of those cases, and therefore you're not going to see like .NET Hot Reload for something like iOS and Android app. But there's a caveat to it. It's a caveat of UWP. If you're running a UWP app as a Xamarin Forms app, you're going to get some limited hot reload because, once again, for the debugger, edit and continue was already supported there, so give it a try. Now, I will say there's a difference between something working and something that we will support in hotfix. We are going to invest into the future. We're going to put a lot of this into .NET 6 and beyond because it's expensive work, it's complicated work, and definitely make your voice heard in what's going on, and we'll do our best. So if it's a small fix, we might be able to do it. If it's a big fix, really try to get into Maui eventually, as an example. You'll have the best inner loop when you get there. Now, also, again, just a reminder that .NET 6 is required for things like hot reload for CLI or Visual Studio with no debugger. Now, Visual Studio releases always in an epic way. We ship the current release, as we're calling it, 17.0, and we always ship a preview, at least that we've always have as long as I've been here. So 17.1 is already out in Preview 1. And in Preview 1, you can already use Hot Reload with a .NET Maui app and a WinUI 3 app. Amazing, right? Those capabilities were built from the ground up into the tech. It's just that those workloads are in the preview release, so that's where you have to be to use it. Now, we talked about certain things not being supported at the moment, and some of them are just literally things we didn't get to. We really tried hard to get everything done that was on a plan. It was a very long plan, a very long document, lots of issues everywhere, but we didn't get Blazor support done under the debugger. This constantly confuses people. I feel terrible about it. I just tweeted somebody while waiting to present to this talk. I'm like, sorry, it actually works with no debugger. So let me back up and explain it. If you're doing a Blazor app, a .NET 6 Blazor app in Visual Studio 2022, and you hit a 5 today, in the current release, or even in 17.1 preview 1, it doesn't matter. We haven't implemented that capability yet. So anywhere you do F5, it's just not going to give you hot reload. But if you do Control F5, if you do the no debugger, we will give you the support. It also works for CLI as well. We will fix that if everything goes well. You know, I'm not promising everything will be perfect, but we're in terms of schedule. But that's our goal. Our goal is to ship this in 17.1 as a feature to close the gap, and also unify those two dialogues. We shouldn't have two root edit dialogues. We should have one. We're really going to try to get that done in 17.1. All right, so hot reload from the CLI. Let's talk about that. This is a great feature if you just want to work from the CLI. And .NET Watch is how you get hot reload from the CLI. You just run the .NET Watch command, and by default, hot reload is enabled. You have to be targeting a .NET 6 app. And there's a bunch of detail here. It's also in our documentation around, like, well, what if I don't want a hot reload? What if I get a root edit? You're certainly not going to get a prompt like the Visual Studio prompt. You're going to get something in the command window there. So this is some basic information of, like, yes, we support all the things. You can run with hot reload, without hot reload. If you get a root edit, we're going to give you some choices and decisions you can make. So that is something that is possible. And we can go ahead and do a really simple demo. So I'm going to go ahead and switch to Visual Studio once again. And let's do that here. So we're going to stop debugging. We're going to reintroduce a bug. And just for fun, I'm going to do this using the terminal window. This is easy because then I'm in the right place, in the right folder. So I'm going to go switch to the API, and I'm going to do .NET Watch. So that's all that's required. You obviously don't have to do this from the terminal window in Visual Studio. You could have done this from the pure command line. I'm just saving myself a second here. So once you run that command, we will start hot reload. And you'll see that in a second here. And there's your Swagger API. And if I'm going to go ahead and try it out, I'm going to execute the Swagger API. As you can see, I'm getting the really long city string bug that was there. And going back to my code editor, right, this could have been Notepad. It really doesn't matter. I'm going to go ahead and take out the code that's causing that problem. I'm going to hit save. Save is detected by .NET Watch. I'm going to go ahead and switch back to my browser and hit get again, try it out, execute. And there you have it. I'm getting the real city there. So this is a really simple example of how to use the CLI, and there's going to be other demos at this conference that probably already happened and will happen, so definitely check them out. So I'm going to switch back to my slides to close out here and talk to you about a recap. So main takeaways you should have is that hot reload is really broadly available for .NET and C++ when you're using Visual Studio 2022 with the debugger. We support hot reload for .NET 6 apps with more capabilities, such as the ability to run without the debugger. And hot reload is available in the CLI. I know lots of folks are happy about that .NET Watch CLI tool. And we're just getting started. I really mean it. We're going to continue to invest release after release and try to make hot reload better for you. Your feedback is really critical for that. Please, please send us your feedback. We want to hear what's working well for you, what doesn't. If something just feels weird, just ping me on Twitter. You never know. Maybe you'll help make a product change happen in Visual Studio. Here's a bunch of resources on this slide. You can take a screenshot of that if you want. And of course, all of that is, you can find it for Google. But we have some good docs for Blazor. We have docs for how to reload itself in Visual Studio. And we have lots of videos at the past event from yesterday. And yeah, that's it. Drop the mic.
All right. Good stuff, sir. Appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you.
All
So what
right.
are we talking about today? Elon?
Today we're talking about Blazor hybrid apps.
Ooh.
I know.
Let's
It's as
hear it.
exciting as it sounds. Cross-platform.
Now I got to stay up and watch this.
Yeah.
Yes. You can be my audience. You can sit right in front of the camera.
I'll just stand right here.
That's fine too.
All right. Take it away, sir.
Perfect.
Awesome. Great. Thank you. Hi, I'm Elan Lipton, and I'm an engineer on the .NET team at Microsoft. I've been working on .NET for, gosh, almost 20 years, I would say, so since the beginning. And today I want to talk to you about one of the latest, greatest, newest things that we've got, and that's building cross-platform native applications with .NET Maui and Blazer. Let's get started. Before we jump into the nitty-gritty technical details, let's ask a few questions. What if I told you that you can build cross-platform native applications with Blazer? Yeah, that Blazer for the web with HTML and CSS, you can build cross-platform native apps. What if I told you you could take your existing razer class libraries, that's RCLs for short, in those apps? You've got some existing code, existing libraries, existing components. You've paid for some third-party components out there. What if I told you you could use those? What if I told you that in those apps you had full native device access from all of those platforms, and that it runs on Windows, macOS, iOS, and Android? And I put a little asterisk there. I went to some site and it said that if you take those 4 operating systems combined, that's more than 95% of the market share of devices that can run apps. That's a lot. So with Blazer, you can do all of these things, and Blazer Hybrid is how you do it. So what exactly is Blazer Hybrid? Well, it's an extension of Blazer. Blazer, you might, if you're already using it today, there's Blazer Server and Blazer WebAssembly. Both of those are for building web applications, websites, web apps. This is a third option for writing desktop and mobile apps, but using that same Blazer technology. We do that by building on the top of .NET 6 and .NET Maui. .NET Maui is the cross-platform UI technology based on its predecessor in Xamarin Forms, and this builds on top of that with some new features for running Blazer. And we do that with this new Blazer Webview control, where you can point it at a razer component that you have and place it anywhere inside your application on .NET Maui, and we'll see how to do that in this talk. So on .NET Maui, using XAML, this is what it might look like in your application. The first thing you have is the actual Blazer Webview control. You drop that in your XAML. You can also do it in C#. There's lots of ways to go about it. And the main thing here is you point the Blazer Webview at what Blazer component do you actually want it to run. So in this case, we have a component called main, and you define that in a razer file. Razer files are compiled into C#, and they get compiled into DLLs. You point your Blazer Webview at it, and there you've got your HTML, your CSS, and everything around that, and the code that actually activates it and makes it real live code. So you've got your event handlers and logic and async background tasks, and so forth. Now, with Blazer Hybrid, I want to tell you one thing that you have to remember, and that's these two things, which is it runs 100% of your app natively on the device in that one process. The second thing of the one thing I want you to know is that there's no HTTP, there's no network, there's no browser sandbox. This is not just a window that's pointing at a website that's running remotely, or running that website on some server locally on the machine, but somehow channeling that HTTP request through, showing the HTML and CSS. It is running the code, all of your app code, locally and natively on the device. The third thing I want you to know, of the one thing I want you to know, and these are all kind of corollaries to the same thing, is that in Blazer Hybrid applications, the only thing that's webby about it is that the HTML UI is rendered into a WebView control. But all the code that runs that is running locally. That's really, really important. There's no interop that's channeling things across different processes with web servers and HTTP. You're not paying any of that overhead because there is no overhead running it this way. So with that, let's jump into a demo. And this demo will start out with .NET Maui, with a Blazer Hybrid application. This app, I'll show you where the GitHub repo is for this later. You can get all the source code that I'm running here right now. I did the last commit, I think, a few hours ago. The first thing I want to show, I'll just run the app. Anybody who knows me knows that I am a Lego fanatic. Yeah, those the building blocks. I have a lot of Lego, and I have to keep track of it. I love keeping track of things. I love having lists, and so why not build an app for tracking all of my Lego? Well, this is it. This is the Lego brick tracker that you can download the source code to. Well, what Lego do I have? Well, fortunately, there's websites, and I'm not affiliated with this, and I don't know if I'll get in trouble for showing some random third-party website, but On this website, you can search for Lego sets, and you can download those as CSV files. So here, I'll save this list. So this is, let's see, this is, oh, that's maybe too big. Let's filter by some theme. Let's see. How about DC Comics Superheroes Lego sets? Let's download that. Save that link. So this is DC Comics. So we've downloaded that CSV file, and now in my app, I can upload that file. This is the file we just downloaded, and then we can do some analysis. So it shows some basic information here. Oh, my touchpad doesn't work. Fortunately, I have a touch screen. Oh, there we go. I can run some analysis on this. That'll tell me how many Lego pieces are in this and how much space do I need. So if you took all of this year's DC Comics superhero set, it's got about 3,800 pieces, and it'll take one average size moving box to move all those pieces. Well, that's lovely, but this is a web app, and I'm not always online. I don't have access. What if we wanted to take this Blazer web app and have a .NET Maui version of it that could even run offline? Well, I've done that. Let's go back here into Visual Studio. And in addition to this BrickSite server site that I also have this Brick Tracker client. Let's check that out. I'll run that. And this app runs on Windows, Android, iOS, and macOS. I'll show it today on Windows and Android that I have here on my Surface Book. Let's get that running. And what we'll see here in this app is most of the UI is exactly the same, because most of the UI I placed inside a Razer class library. And I referenced that same Razer class library from my Blazer web server, my Blazer server web app, and from my .NET Maui Blazor hybrid application that runs cross-platform natively. So here is that same thing. Now, this is my app. This is an exe process that's running locally on my machine. If I unplug the network, probably something horrible happens here at the studio, so I'm not going to do that. But this runs completely offline. Now, here you see it's already detected that I downloaded that DC Comics Superheroes CSV file. But I can even download more files. So let's go here. I have here this query. This is all the Lego that I own. It's a substantial list. Let's save that here. So this is Elon's Lego sets. Don't touch. I have my Lego. My kids have their Lego. The two do not overlap. Now we go here back to my app, and we see I didn't actually refresh anything in the app because this is a native app running on my machine. It's used file system watchers to detect that this new CSV file has dropped on the disk, and it's automatically loaded it, parsed it, refreshed the UI without doing anything. You can't do certain things in web apps. If you want to add certain rich capabilities in a web app, you have to do that by bringing it local onto the machine. And with Blazer Webview for Blazor hybrid apps, you can do that. And with .NET Maui, you can take this exact same code, and in fact, let me show it, on Android. So I've already deployed this to my Android emulator here. So here's the .NET Brick Tracker. It's exactly the same code. Actually, I think I made one UI tweak and I didn't upload it before. So I think here I'm just going to show it to be perfectly honest. Here, there's still some unused content from the default project template. But aside from that one difference, it's exactly the same. And that's the commit I did 3 hours ago. You can check me that I'm honest. Now, on Android, we're not going to use File System Watcher because you generally don't access the file system directly. But what you can do is tweak the UI, because even though 99% of the application is exactly the same on all the platforms, you do sometimes have to do something a little bit different on each platform. And so here we can open a file, use the picker, and analyze. And here I've got a Harry Potter set of Lego collections. Again, you can run all the code is exactly the same between all the different applications. Well, what does that actually look like? Back in Visual Studio, well, this Brick Summary project, this is where I have my collection summary. This is a Razer class library. It's got some Razer components in it. This is why you don't use hot-off-the-press versions of Visual Studio sometimes. And I've written these components with the foreknowledge that I want to run it on the web, I want to run it on Android, I want to run iOS. So I've designed the UI to be structured and factored and designed so that it can run on all of those platforms and all the different screen formats, screen sizes, wide screens, narrow screens, and so forth. And then here in the Brick Tracker client, all you have to do is in my main page XAML file, the same code that we saw on the slide a few moments ago, this is that Blazer Webview that, in my case, is the entire application. So that's the kind of the full screen of the content page is that Blazer Webview. And I've pointed it at my component that ultimately hosts that same UI. The one thing that is different is that inside my index.razer, which is that main page that you saw, here's where I have some conditional UI where I say, well, if I'm running on a device that doesn't support file system watchers, I might if-def some code or conditionally enable something that may or may not be available depending on where I'm running. So I have some conditional UI that says, should I show the file picker? If so, great. I have the open to file button that you would have on, let's say, Android and iOS. And further down, and this is where I have that very simple logic that just detects, what operating system am I running on. And then similarly, I have a use file watcher where on, let's say, Windows and Mac Catalyst, I can use the file system watcher, I can monitor the user's downloads, and I can automatically detect those and load those files. So anytime there's a change in the file system in the user's downloads folder, I can load that, I can detect the CSV file with all the Lego set information, parse it, load it, render the UI, all using Blazer. And that's the same component that I use on the web app as well. Okay. Now, they gave us these slide templates that have all, like, I don't know, 20 or 30 little .NET bots. That's the, I guess, official, unofficial logo. And I saw this .NET bot in the slide template that they gave us, and that's what I looked like when I was done building this demo, because it was so easy to just kind of put all these things together and just get it running on .NET Maui and on Android and iOS and Mac Catalyst and building the web app that I just sat down, relaxed, enjoyed the evening. And you can see what time the commits are. They're usually at night because, well, kids playing with their Lego, not my Lego. And really with Blazer Hybrid, I think it represents what I think of as some of the Blazer values. You can use Visual Studio to develop your app. You got all your refactoring and your tools and IntelliSense and project templates, all that stuff that Visual Studio brings you. The debugger. You get to use and reuse C# and .NET, and that's kind of two different things. You get to use C# when you're writing new code, but I really want to emphasize that you can reuse a lot of the stuff. This is if you have a .NET standard library or a .NET 6.0 library or NuGet package, things like that. You can reuse all of those things in here. And that's great to kind of get you up and running, especially if you've already invested in building Blazer web apps, and I'll show more about that. You can get up and running really, really quickly by using, without any changes, those existing libraries that you have. And the same thing goes for HTML and CSS. If you already know HTML, you know CSS, if you've built assets, every time I start a project, I just go to my previous project, I copy paste all that CSS because I know I've got some good styles in there. I know I've got some good markup. That's the table style that I like. I just copy paste it in, build the next app. And then on top of that, a rich control ecosystem. There are tons of third-party vendors out there. There's a bunch of stuff built into Blazer, but there's a bunch of NuGet packages out there, many freed. There's many free ones, many that are paid and really good value for building really beautiful-looking applications that have amazing functionality. Now, when you're going to build a Blazer hybrid app, there's a few different ways I think about that. One, which I just showed, is I built a brand new app from scratch. I know and I'm planning to build my razer class libraries so that they can be used on all these different platforms, on the web, on different native devices, small screens, large screens, and so forth. That's one way. But for a lot of cases, you might already have some existing Blazer web app, and you could potentially even host that entire Blazer web app, all the pages, all the content, all the navigation, all the functionality, and just drop it into a native app. And that's what we'll see in the next demo. And then the last thing is you might have some existing purely native app that you want to modernize with some web content or reuse little bits or little islands of Blazer throughout that application. And what you could then do is, even if you're modernizing an application, you might start out with a small island, a little rectangle of the screen. You might drop in some Blazer components in there to add some new feature. Maybe you found some cool Blazer component that you want to host inside there. Maybe that rectangle kind of grows over time. Maybe you've built a WinForms or WPF application, runs on Windows only, of course, and you start adding new UI with Blazer, and maybe that rectangle grows. Maybe it grows until it's the full screen. And now that you've got basically the whole UI built using Blazer and web and HTML and CSS, well, now you can drop it in a .NET Maui application. Now it can run on Android. Now you could run it in Blazer WebAssembly on the web. And this enables you to do all those things. So you have this pattern here. It takes work, but it's something that you could approach incrementally without necessarily paying a huge cost to get started. So that second case, which is, what if I have an existing Blazor web app and I want to add a native experience for it? Well, in the keynote that was earlier today or yesterday, I have no idea what day it is, but that's okay, because a lot of you can watch this online later. In the keynote for .NET Conf, they showed a .NET podcast app. So I've got that here, in one of my Visual Studios. And let me run that application. This is the same app that you saw with the same functionality. It's got a list of podcasts. You can listen. They added a listen together feature to that app. And this is hosted inside .NET Maui. So here we have the .NET Maui. It's the same app that you've seen. You can play a podcast and listen to it. There's a lot of great content here for .NET. And what they showed, I believe, in the keynote was they added this listen together feature, and then just this rectangle here, just this one island of Blazor, was hosted inside a Blazer Webview. But what if you wanted to go further? What if you didn't want to build two different versions of the app? Well, that's actually what this app is. I didn't tell you that, but this is all one big Blazer Webview. What this app is essentially an almost empty .NET Maui application, and they pointed the Blazer Webview at the entire web app. So it's compiled in here. It's all running locally, natively on the device. Again, just the HTML is being rendered into a web view. But all the same stuff works. I could listen to these podcasts, hit play. You can do all the listen together. Everything works. I can switch. There's features here. I can switch to dark mode if I want. That all works great. Now, that's kind of neat because I can take that existing web app and have a native experience. But what I really want to do is add uniquely native experiences to that app. And that's what I've done here. So let's take a look at that in Visual Studio as well. So here in the, oh, actually, let me run it one more time. Actually, I can just run it from the start menu. Where is it? .NET podcast. I can't find it. I'll just run it from here. So while that is loading, I added some functionality that is uniquely native, which is to track your local storage on the device. Podcasts, if you download them, takes up a lot of space. So I added here this little storage indicator here that is looking at the local hard drive. It's looking at my C drive on Windows, and it's saying like, oh gosh, you've got only about 600 gigs free. Maybe you want to make more space. So there's a make more space button there. Let's take a look at what that does. So in the pages, and this pages project is this exact same content. This is where all the content of the web app actually lives. In the nav menu component, I added this storage service, which down here at the bottom, and I'll kind of, maybe I can do it a little bit kind of side by side. So this little storage little thing here, I had to check that if the storage service is available, which it's not available when running on the web because it's not your storage, it's wherever it's running on Azure in the cloud. But if I'm running locally, it'll show this progress bar that shows how much storage is used out of your storage total. And then I have a button here that calls the make more space method that is implemented on a per platform basis. And now I've only implemented that service on the Maui project. So here in the Maui project, in the Maui program, scroll down just a bit, I register a service. This is the entry point of the .NET Maui application. I've got an implementation of this new storage service interface that I've defined. And the implementation is right here, where it does some pretty trivial thing. It just gets the first hard drive that's on the system, gets some basic information about it, what's the size of the drive, how much free space is there, and so forth. And then the last thing here is this make more space method. Now, what does that do? How do you make a lot of space on a hard drive? Well, there's this one trick that hard drive manufacturers don't want you to know, and that's, hey, just format the hard drive, make a lot of space. So I only have that on Windows. If I wanted to do something on Android, you might pop up the storage settings app in Android. But on Windows, let's just format the hard drive. So if I hit show more space, make more space here, that's going to format my hard drive. So let's press that. And well, unfortunately, Windows won't let me do that because this is my C drive is where I installed Windows, so I can't actually format the hard drive. But this really is the actual format hard drive UI that I am calling. I am doing a Win32 pinvoke. This is the same thing you can call from C code or C++ code. Of course, you can do it from C#. You can do it from a Blazor desktop application as well. It's just C# code running on Windows. You might, like I said, call a different API on each platform, but this is the real code that you have. That you can run. So you can take your web app and conditionally add some logic that's available on only certain platforms when running natively or locally. And now I think we got time for one more demo. Now, what if I've got some existing application? Maybe I wrote it using WinForms or WPF. It's an app. The previous session that you could watch was about migrating. We talked about migrating WinForms applications to bring them up to .NET 6. Now, let's say you've got that, and now you're running on .NET 6. That's great. And one thing you could do to it is drop a WinForms Blazer Webview. We run on .NET Maui and WinForms and WPF. We have a Blazer Webview control for each of those, and start adding some richness to your application. So back in this brick tracker solution, I've got my WinForms project here. This is a .NET 6 WinForms project. And this looks like basically any WinForms project you've probably ever seen. It's gray with 3 more shades of gray on it. Your standard kind of Win32, not necessarily the most visually appealing application, but hey, we all use these in our works and our jobs and our lives. And anytime I need to just whip a quick app together, I just go to WinForms. I've been using it for 20 years. It's wonderful. But let's say I want to add some richness to it. Well, what I've done here is on this analysis tab, this app, by the way, does absolutely nothing. It's just a little shell of an application. On this analysis tab, I've added a Blazer Webview control. Let me show the code for that. So here on my form1.cs, when the form starts up, I create my Blazer Webview. You can do this in the designer as well. The build that I have, there was a bug that I just fixed, but it wasn't available in this build where it doesn't work in the designer. But this, you can drag and drop in the designer, set all the options. Just like we saw in the XAML example before, I pointed at my Blazer component. So in this case, I have a brick analysis razer component that in this case is sitting in exactly the same project. So I've got this just one Blazer component sitting here. It's a .razer file. Now to build this, if we take a look at what the UI looks like, it's got a clock, and it's actually a ticking clock. I don't know what it's ticking to. I think that's just the current time, and it's not saying how much time I have left, because I don't know, that'll be interesting. And it's got some rich UI. Now, I didn't actually build this UI. I want to tell you what I did. Last night when I was finishing up this demo, I need to figure out what am I actually going to put for the content for this. And so I went to Bing and I typed free Blazer components. And I clicked on the first link, and it was the Radzin Blazer components. And all I did is follow their tutorial. Now, I'm not super familiar with the Radzin Blazer components, but I don't think they did anything special for Blazer Desktop. And I don't think they need to, at least not in most cases. Why? Well, it's just hosting those same Blazer components. As long as they render CSS and do some JS interop to some JavaScript and interact with HTML in the DOM, they don't need to do anything special. So I literally followed their getting started tutorial about how to add a reference. You add a reference to the NuGet package, you add a reference to the JavaScript, you add a reference to the CSS, you import a couple namespaces, and then this is exactly the code I did not change. I think I unindented it is the only thing that I changed in the code. This is exactly their sample code, all of this code. I didn't change anything. Maybe I switched spaces to tabs, I'm not sure, but nothing changed. And it worked exactly on the first try. So if you want to add, let's say, a clock, for example, to your WinForms application, or there's some other components that you've written, or there's a vendor out there who's written, or you bring somebody in your team who's a Blazer expert and you want them to add a new feature, you can do that. It's super easy. It's literally maybe 10 lines of code to add a Blazer Webview to an existing WinForms application running on .NET 6. And then it's just another few lines to add a reference to your Blazer component. And you're off to the races. So what are some of the benefits that we saw? You can reuse your web development skills. So if you know HTML and you know CSS, you know how to use Blazer, and your code. You already have a lot of assets that you've built over the years. You can use that. You get all the native device capabilities. I know I always show how to format the hard drive, but that's just the killer proof that I have native access. But we also saw file system watchers and other disk capabilities that are not available on the web. You can mix native and web UI in WPF, in WinForms, and in .NET Maui across all the platforms. And ultimately, the thing we all want is reduce app development time. It did not take me a long time to make these demos. I know I didn't spend a lot on the styling, but the code did not take very long to write. So in summary, you can choose building web or native or hybrid, all using that same Blazer, the same exact Blazer running on all of those. To reach cross-platform, you've got .NET Maui running on Android, iOS, macOS, and Windows. If you've got your existing applications, those Battleship Gray WinForms applications, drop a Blazer Webview in there, modernize it, add some new features. You can get the previews of all this in the Visual Studio previews, release Q2 of next year. And then lastly, you can hear the links. All the Blazer hybrid stuff is on the .NET/Maui repo, and the demo code is right here on my GitHub. Please check that out. Thank you very much.
Elon, that was amazing. Congratulations. So many demos packed into such a small time.
Yeah, I'm an engineer, and so I get the slides out of the way, and then just code.
That's what we all like to see anyway. So we do have a couple questions. I'll move through them quickly. Will there be a project template in multi-mode Blazor app? WebAssembly, server, hybrid?
We've been considering should we do a project template like that. I don't know if I would necessarily do Blazor Server and Blazor WebAssembly, but certainly, let's say Blazor WebAssembly with Blazor Desktop or Blazor Server with Blazor Desktop. We've thought about it. It's a balance between cluttering the file new project dialog, which it's got, I don't know, hundreds of templates in there. So we're not against the idea. We just want to make sure we can do it right. So maybe it's the same project template with an option or something like that. We just don't want to. We want to avoid clutter with the less is more pattern. It is not hard to start without it. You can just create a .NET Maui Blazor application and then just add a razer class library, add a reference. It is 2 more steps, but we're thinking about it. It is a perfectly reasonable idea.
Yeah, okay, so it may be in the works.
Absolutely.
Fernando asks, I think it says, is there a way to use .NET Maui components along with Blazer Webview?
Yeah, the answer is absolutely 100% yes. The Blazer Webview is a Maui control. We have a WinForms, a WPF, and a Maui control. You can mix and match that wherever you want. So if you want the Blazer Webview just to show up on one page or just take up half of the screen, you can do that and have all the rest be native Maui elements, the buttons, labels, shell, all of those things. It's just a .NET Maui control. It's not special in that respect, so you can mix it however you want.
Okay, so based on preferences and flexibility on their own design.
Yep, it just depends on the app that you're building. You can start out with a small Blazer Webview and then have it take over your app, or you can just put it for one piece of functionality. Maybe you have some feature on your web app that you want to just quickly bring in, and that's what they showed at the keynote. Hey, we've got this feature we just finished building for the web app. You have literally 5 minutes to get it into your .NET Maui app, and you could do it in 5 minutes. And that's pretty cool.
Yeah, that is very cool. Okay, we have time for one more quick question. This may not be quick, but you mentioned on the Blazor value slide, develop with Visual Studio. Are there any limitations with using Visual Studio Code?
I have used Visual Studio Code with .NET Maui and Blazor. I mostly use Visual Studio in my day job. It just has the features that I need, that I like. I know a lot of things do work in VS Code. I think there are some current limitations, I don't remember what they are, where some scenarios don't work well from the command line, which is the Visual Studio Code. When it runs your app, it goes through a different process compared to Visual Studio for Windows or Visual Studio Mac. By the way, Visual Studio Mac does also work. So there are some limitations right now that we're working out, but a lot of things do just work in VS Code. You can run your app if you have VS Code on a Mac, you can run your iOS app. It launches the simulator, and you can run your iOS app or Mac Catalyst. And I believe it works on Windows as well, but I'm not as sure.
Okay. All right, seems like there's a lot of opportunity here.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much, Elon. I am so excited about the future of hybrid apps with Maui and Blazor.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Hello, everybody. Hello, Jeff.
Hey there,
Good
friend.
morning, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you're joining us from in the world. We really appreciate you taking that time to spend it with us here today to learn about a very exciting hot topic called Blazer. And as you can see, we both have our blazers on
Oh, yeah.
today, for I
Absolutely.
think it's appropriate. So we're both wearing blazers. I have long brown curly hair. I'm wearing glasses and a black blazer for those of us who are using just audio descriptions. And I'm joined with my good friend, coworker, and colleague, Jeff Ritz.
Hey, Jamie, it's good to see you. Yeah, I've got my GitHub hat on. And of course, very purple, magic, and sparkly, shiny blazer.
Yes, one of my favorite blazers. So not to be confused, there's Blazor and there's Blazor. So Jeff, we're here to talk about the fundamentals of Blazer.
Yeah,
And can you give us a little insight about that? This is a word we've been hearing thrown around a lot lately. Give us the scoop. What is Blazer?
Oh my gosh. So Blazer is a new user interface framework and technology that's built with .NET that we're really excited about because it gives us that component-based way for us to build user interfaces. We can compose components into more larger components and even into pages that we deliver over the web. Now, what's really interesting about this is we can run our Blazor framework both on the server like we're used to with ASP.NET or other web technologies like Node.js, but we can also run Blazor in the browser using a technology called WebAssembly and have it run natively in the browser, just like we might have our JavaScript run in the browser. Oh, I think Jamie's muted.
Whoops, we are live. So that sounds incredibly useful. It sounds like there's a lot of ways that we can implicate this into a bunch of our different web applications.
Oh, yeah.
Why don't we get the rundown? Like, what are the fundamentals? Where do I get started? What is the actual beginning?
Let me start off. I'm going to open. I've got Microsoft Edge running here on my desktop. If we can share my desktop, there it is. This is the Blazer.net web page, and you can see it's got this really long URL in the browser address bar. But if you just go to Blazer.net, it'll get you started. There you go. And I see we shared the link out. Thanks so much. And there's everything you need to download the tools to write code with Blazor, download the SDK, the software development kit, so that you can build and compile your application with Blazor is all available right from here. And there's a bunch of information if you need to share with other folks on your team, with your managers, some of those important decision makers in your organization about when and why you should choose Blazor. We've got listed here on the front page of Blazer.net. So we're going to dig in and we're actually going to get started. We're going to follow along with the Learn module here. And the Learn module actually tracks along very nicely with the Get Started bits here. But this isn't too bad to download and install all the things you need to get started. So the basic things that we encourage folks to get started with, depending on where you're coming from to get started with Blazor. If you're on Windows, you can install a copy of Visual Studio 2019. It comes with all the runtime and all the tools that you need for building with Blazor. But if you're also, excuse me, if you're on a Mac, you can install Visual Studio for Mac. You'll get all the tools and runtimes you need with that as well. If you choose to include the web workload in both versions of Visual Studio, works great. And if you're on Linux, or maybe you don't want to install the full versions of Visual Studio, that's okay too. We have the .NET command line tools that you can install and run with Visual Studio Code and have a great experience building applications wherever you might be, Windows, Mac, or Linux.
Amazing. Amazing. So whatever platform or tooling that you prefer to use, Blazor is there for you.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And that also means we can deploy a Blazor app to wherever you want to go as well, whether it's a Windows server or it's a Linux server, or maybe you want to deploy in a container and get that native cloud experience. We've got you covered in all those different deployment patterns that you can work with Blazor applications.
Amazing. And so what's probably the first thing that folks need to download to get started, to get it up and running?
So let me head back over to our screens. There we go. Thank you so much. And the first thing that we recommend folks install, if you don't have Visual Studio installed, if you want to use Visual Studio Code, or maybe you want to use some other text editor, that's okay too. You're going to download the .NET SDK. It's right here. It's the first button that you get to from that Blazor tutorial here. Download and install is right here on the left side. Download the .NET SDK. And at the command prompt, then you'll be able to run the .NET command to get started, to see that, yes, you have .NET running and available. So over here, I just run .NET, and it comes back and reports everything is available here. And I can check the version of .NET that I have installed. Now, I have a preview version here of .NET 6, but you may have other versions of .NET installed, like 3.14 or 5.0, and I've got another 5.0 preview installed here. That's okay. It'll run any one of these just fine, and you'll be able to work with Blazor on the server and Blazor WebAssembly. So once we have it installed, yeah, good stuff. So next thing we want to do is actually get in and take a look at building our first application here with Blazor. And we're going to build a Blazor server app.
Okay, so are we ready to build a Blazor server app? We ready?
Absolutely. Let's do this. How we doing there, chat room? What do you think? You ready to get into this? See our first application?
Yeah.
So let's do
Yeah,
this.
so let's go.
All right. So we recommend folks get started with a Blazor server application. It's a little bit easier for you to interact with. It's going to give you a faster experience out of the gate, and some of the other things that are coming along that are going to give you a better development experience are all available with our Blazor server configuration. So I'm going to copy this first command that's suggested that we have here to create our app. .NET new Blazor server -o Blazor app, and this -- no HTTPS. What's all that stuff? What is this trying to do here? So what this is doing is it's going to create that new Blazor server application. We're going to name it Blazor app, and we're not going to configure it for SSL just yet. We don't really need that for just our little development environment that we're going to work with here. So I'm going to go down here, and I'm going to create a folder called Let's Learn. Drop into that folder, and let's do that. .NET new Blazor server, and it was Blazor app, and no HTTPS. And this is going to create that project. It's going to restore from the default templates that are available that come with the .NET command line. So if we take a look, I have my Blazor app folder. I'll drop into that folder, and if we look, we've got a couple things here that are kind of what we'd expect if we were building an ASP.NET Core application. It's a little bit tricky to view here on the command line. So let me open this in full Visual Studio 2019, and let's take a look at what this looks like. So I'm going to jump over to Visual Studio.
Yeah, let's look what it looks like in the environment. But is that to say that all of this automatically downloads when you do the .NET SDK download for Blazor?
It doesn't download it when you install the SDK. However, it will reach out and install those as you need them. So we don't put down all of the latest workload, all of the latest packages and references for the template. We fetch them the first time that you request interacting with them. That way you'll get a more recent version than perhaps when you first installed the SDK.
Gotcha.
So I'm going to open up Solution Explorer here, and that's a little bit easier. Most of us that use .NET are used to seeing projects in this structure. And we're seeing some things here that we kind of we're like I said, we're used to seeing inside of an ASP.NET Core application. Just looking down here, a program, a startup class in ASP.NET Core is something we're used to seeing with information in here about configuring services, configuring the HTTP pipeline and how we interact with those. And this is pretty standard what we have in here. There's one or two extra lines about adding server-side Blazor, and there's another entry down here about map Blazor hub. We don't need to worry about those. Those are pretty standard things that you don't typically have to change. But if you want to dig in further, there is documentation that'll explain to you what those things do. If we take a look under pages, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, before we get too far ahead, so what does the no-https do? And why do we need to note that?
Sure. So the reason that we chose no HTTPS back there in the configuration, let me head back, right? When it said here on the command prompt, no HTTPS, what that does is it turns off the default transport layer security features that come with the Blazor server template. This way you can work locally and you don't have to worry about or get involved with some of that configuration that, for the purposes of a little test application here that we're building and learning with, we don't need to get too confused by adding those features here.
I see. So this makes it a little bit more of a simplistic test application.
Yep.
Okay, great.
So good question. Thank you for asking.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to move on and let's actually run the application. Now, the way that this suggests we run it is at the command line using .NET Watch Run. So let me do that. Instead of running it from inside Visual Studio, we'll use Visual Studio as our editor so we can write and change our code. I'm going to go to the command line and I'm going to execute .NET Watch Run. Now, what this is doing, and let me clear the screen so you can see what happens. What this does is it's going to run our application and watch the folder for changes. So if anything changes inside the project folder on disk, it's actually going to restart the application for us and update the content in the browser for us. So here it's going to download all the things we need. It's compiled the application. You see it there. And there it is. There's my hello world for the template that ships with Blazor and the .NET command line.
That was pretty fast.
Yeah, right? I mean, okay, granted, there's not a lot in here. It's pretty simple. There's not much to really take a look at, but there are some interesting things in here that we can get involved with. And what I want to make sure I call out is that the Blazor application runs on top of a .NET runtime. Now, I mentioned this is a server application, so we're going to build with the .NET runtime and deliver that to run on a server. So your server or your Docker container that you may deploy into is going to have a .NET runtime in there. That might be .NET Core 3.1 or one of the newer versions of the .NET runtime like .NET 5 or .NET 6 that's going to be released here in November 2021. So that runtime ships with our server application. And if we want to deploy using WebAssembly and we want to ship Blazor into the browser, we're going to package up a subsection of that runtime and deliver that into the browser as well. And that gets specially compiled so that it runs specifically on top of that WebAssembly runtime that all the browsers, all the modern browsers have and support. So first thing that I want to show you here is the counter. Now, come on, Fritz. This is a counter. I mean, really, I'm clicking a button and it increments a number here. What's so special about that, right? I mean, come on.
I wasn't going to say anything, Jeff, but I was waiting for the punchline here.
There's no magic to this, right? Like, what's it doing? So let me show you behind the scenes what's happening with this. Let me show you over here on the network tab. And I have to open this. Oh, no, I have to refresh. Here we go. Check out right here. See this localhost status 101 switching protocols? It's actually connecting and using a technology called WebSockets so that it can start sharing information back and forth to the browser. So let me show you. There you can see the negotiation that's going on. But it's sending messages, very, very small messages, back and forth to the browser. And this is how Blazor server side works, is it sends these, look at these little 3-byte messages, 44-byte. What's happening is Blazor renders content on the server and delivers just those changes to the user interface into the browser over WebSockets. So I'm going to clear this. When I click that button, we sent a binary message and it was 298 bytes. We received a binary message for 148 bytes and it sent back 26 bytes. And we can take a look at what's going on in here and you can see the raw hex of what was sent back and forth. But you can see the text of what exactly happened here. And if you were to go through and pull this apart, you'd see this is a button click event is what it's detected. And what was received coming back is an indicator that says, well, replace that with the value 1. And if I clear this again and I click that a second time, you'll see we receive a message back that has some compressed information, but it's changing it to 2. And we're doing this back and forth. So all of our interactions to build this user interface are happening on the server. Now, okay, that's kind of interesting. How did we build that? How does it know how to do these things, right? So, Jamie, let's take a look at some source code for this thing.
Yeah, that'd be great.
All right. So I'm going to head back over to Visual Studio. And I'm going to look at that counter page. Now, this is counter.razer right here. And when I open that up, this looks a little bit like a razer template that I might have used with ASP.NET MVC. I've got some HTML mixed with some C#. I mean, it says counter. That was that header I saw at the top of the page. Counter count, current count, and at current count. Well, okay, I'm used to seeing that with Razer templates. The @ sign kind of switches me back and forth to C# syntax. Okay, and a HTTP button, cool, with a CSS class defined. @ on click. All right. This isn't a JavaScript on click. This is a C# on click. So when this page is rendered, that @ on click is telling the Blazor runtime, run this C# method, increment count, which is right here inside this C# code block. Now that's kind of weird, right? Seeing C# mixed in with HTML like that. Not going to lie. It's a little bit weird. But
yeah, it's not the norm that we're potentially used to.
No. I mean, Razer templates do a little bit of this, but a code block like this, we're getting a little bit out there. Follow with me for a second. A private int current count equals 0. That's a field. That's an integer field being defined. We've seen that in C# before in other C# classes. So we're defining it like a field in a class, but here it's inside of this page that's been defined. And current count is being referenced here. So if we think back to how Razer works, and for those of you who aren't familiar with Razer, I'll explain quickly. The value of current count is just going to be output right here where it's being referenced. And you can see when I click on it, it highlights all the references to current count for us in Visual Studio. So when the increment count method is executed here, and that's a regular C# method, it's going to take the current count and increment it by 1 using the C# increment operator ++. So it increments it, and we get this very simple binding operation happen, right? We've changed the value, which means that this automatically updates because the Blazer runtime sees that the current count has changed. So it repaints that section of the user interface. So I get that click and it increments the number.
I see. So is an advantage of using Blazor so that we can use C# and won't have to use JavaScript anymore?
Yes and no. You're not going to be able to get away from JavaScript entirely. You can get away from a lot of JavaScript. You can definitely get away from it. But there are places where if you want to interact with your browser, you want to interact with the features of the browser beyond just the elements that you're painting on the page here. You want to reach out and grab the location sensors. You want to reach into the browser and you want to do other interactions with embedded elements. Well, you're going to need to use JavaScript to do that. And there are capabilities inside of Blazor to do that type of JavaScript interop. It's a little bit further advanced than we're going to cover in this session, but we do have great documentation that'll show you not just how to call JavaScript from .NET, but from your JavaScript, be able to call back into your .NET code. Really cool stuff, and just a little bit further advanced than what we're going to cover as part of this.
Yes, thank you for that explanation. For everybody following along, we do have the documentation linked in our resources. If we could have that, there we go, perfect, thank you. Thank you, people behind the curtain. This is our Blazor resources. All of the resources for this event, plus tons more, can be found in this link, including documentation that Jeff was just referring to. And I see a bunch of questions coming in. I promise we'll make time for them. Keep them coming, and we'll set a time in just a few minutes to kind of cover those directly. So keep them coming.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so just explain this to me.
Yeah, let me finish one last bit here.
Yeah.
That's kind of important, and I skipped right over the first line of the counter page here. This line up at the top, at page /counter. So we have to define for ASP.NET, for Blazor, we need to tell Blazor what components, what files are going to listen and respond to the various addresses that we navigate to inside of our application. So when we do this, right, when we want to have links or buttons that go to different pages, we need to declare where those various pages are listening and handling requests. So by placing at page /counter, we're adding a route. We're defining a route that says when somebody wants to navigate to my website /counter, they're going to get the contents of this page. So if I go back over here, you can see /counter on my address bar brings me here. And if I click back on the home page, I'm navigated away and back, and it navigates me into that counter page. So this is a way for us to tell Blazor exactly where these pages, these .razer files, are going to respond to those requests. So.
Oh, I see. Okay, that's very fascinating. I was muted.
So now I think, do we want to do the check your knowledge here? Or do we want to keep going? I can keep going.
Yeah, let's go ahead and keep going, and then in a few moments, I'll get to some questions that we have. Some pretty good questions too. So
fantastic. So when I showed you the counter source code here, this is a .razer file, counter.razer, and all of our Blazor syntax are stored in these .razer files. Now, if we look at them, take a look back at index, these are pages because they have the at page directive up at the top of the page. However, they're also components. They have the exact same syntax as a page and can be reused inside of other pages by just referencing them by their file name. So check this out. I have survey prompt here. I'm in dark theme for Visual Studio because I am an elite programmer. I believe in dark theme. You can use light theme, whatever you might like. But in dark theme, this turquoise text for survey prompt indicates that this isn't an HTML page, an HTML tag. This is actually a directive that references another component. And if we open our Solution Explorer, you'll see in the shared folder, there is a survey prompt component declared here. And here's the HTML that goes with that. Okay, that kind of makes sense. The HTML that's inside of a .razer file, we can embed inside of another one by just referencing it by its name. So I can take that counter page and reference it here by just typing counter. And there's Visual Studio giving me a little bit of help, telling me that that's available. So I will save that. And I will go back over to my homepage, and there's the counter. So we've taken all the contents of that counter.razer file, and we've embedded it inside of our index page by just referencing the tag name. Now, this is a separate instance from this one over here, right? And I'll click through. We're up at 15. And it doesn't remember the value of the counter. But we can now reuse some of those files in other places. The ability to use that it makes sense. We're going to want in multiple places, or we're going to build components that are going to fix a standard look and feel, or a standard way that we want to present data inside of our application. So let's take some steps here and let's see what else we can do with components, because just like the survey prompt component here, I'd like to be able to pass some data into my counter component so that we can interact with it and provide different features depending on where it's used. So
Amazing.
Yeah.
Before we get into that next step, Jeff, can we take a few moments for some questions? We
Let's
got a lot
do
of them coming in. Okay, great. I just want to get these answered before we get too far ahead.
All right.
Okay, so I have a lot of questions. You ready?
Hit me.
Okay, and thank you everybody for posting these questions. We'll get to as many as we can. So, so first off, what is the difference and use cases of server versus WebAssembly?
Oh, good question. There's actually, I believe we have on the front of, if you go through the Learn module, here in the second step, there is how WebAssembly works. So WebAssembly means we're going to deliver your Razer components, your .NET runtime, and have it run on top of WebAssembly all in the browser. Versus server side, you're going to have your Razer components and .NET runtime running inside of an ASP.NET Core application in a nice blue cloud. It can be other clouds, but we like blue clouds here. Nice fluffy blue, Azure blue clouds here at Microsoft.
Very specifically blue.
Yeah, a specific shade of blue. And it's going to send data back and forth to the browser to update your web pages that you're going to be delivering. Now, what are the use cases for the two is the second half of that question. So good use case for Blazor server side is when you want to keep all of your business logic, all of the information to build and manage your application on the server. Now, this is important if you're in some sort of a verified environment or ecosystem. And I'm thinking specifically of things like the finance industry or pharmaceuticals, where you can't, for the purposes of validation from outside organizations, you can't have that code get out and onto just anybody's workstation, anybody's computer, anybody's phone or other device. So you need to keep all of that business logic on the server in order to maintain that validated state, and you just deliver the user interface updates to those browsers. Now, Other folks will use this as well. It ends up with a very thin and lightweight interaction across the network. So that might be really good for you if you're broadcasting across the internet on the public web, and you might be reaching out to folks who don't have a great connection and you want to transmit just very small packets. You saw the when I showed inside of the network traffic, very small traffic, hundreds of bytes, low hundreds of bytes, right? 200 bytes, that's not going to impact folks significantly when they're interacting with your application. On the other hand, Blazor with WebAssembly, you're installing the whole enchilada inside of the browser. So you're going to have to download a couple DLLs to run in the browser. That depends on how many features you use inside of .NET that will determine how large a payload you deliver. Now, that could be anywhere between 2 meg, 8 meg, 10 meg. Depends on exactly what you're using. We've got tools that will compress and tree shake and give just those DLLs that you need to run in the browser. Now, folks hear 2 meg, 8 meg, 10 meg, and they think, oh my gosh, that's so much data. When you look at other popular, very large websites, I'm not going to name any, but you can take a look on your own hitting F12 on those websites, and they deliver significantly more than 8 meg to run in your browser. But the point here is, just like some of those websites, you can now install and run Blazor just like a progressive web app. You can install all of those DLLs on a device, whether it's a phone, a tablet, a PC, and all of those DLLs are going to be running locally, saved and running offline, and making just the connections to interact with the server when you need to. So when would you choose to use Blazor WebAssembly? When you need to have that disconnected application. You want to be able to run outside of being connected to a web server all the time. And that might be great for folks that have a field sales team or field technicians, representatives that aren't connected to the internal web servers all the time. They need to update their phone, update their device, go out and perform service at customers' facilities, and they're disconnected. Save things locally. You come back, you sync when you get back on the internal network, and it works great. There are other folks that are building internet-facing applications that use Blazor. It's really great stuff, but it does use a little bit more bandwidth to make that initial download. After that, Blazor caches that content very aggressively in the browser, and folks will have a great experience at that point. But we do caution that there is an initial burst of bandwidth that's needed to get started as a viewer interacting with a Blazor WebAssembly application. That was a lot, Jamie.
I think I did follow you. So
Okay.
Blazor server would be good to use if you weren't trying to expose the web API.
No, Blazor server would be good to use if you want to make sure that your DLLs, that your application is staying protected and not being shared, right? So in the WebAssembly diagram we have here, all of your .NET code gets shipped down to the browser to some viewer that you might not know, versus Blazor server, it all lives in your web server. So yeah, your APIs, your business logic, if you don't want to share those things, you want to use Blazor server.
I see. So it's a little bit more protected.
Exactly.
How does Blazor compare with other web frameworks like React and Angular and etc.?
Great question. I get this question a lot. So it is a Blazor server is just as fast because it's all running on a server, and we're running in shared memory on the server. So you get these updates into the browser very, very quickly. It's not quite native speed, but it's very quick. When you run Blazor WebAssembly, first off, Blazor WebAssembly is only, we're into year 2 of it being in release to many RTM, versus things like Angular, Vue, React. They've been around for more than 10 years. So they've been optimized, and they're running on a JavaScript framework, JavaScript runtime inside the browser that's been around for 25 years. So Yeah, those have been optimized and have been out there for a while. Blazor runs a little bit slower because the WebAssembly runtimes aren't entirely optimized yet. We're seeing the Blazor runtimes, the Blazor DLLs and delivery getting optimized. Right now, it actually runs and gets interpolated when it gets delivered into the browser. So there is a just-in-time compilation that happens when Blazor WebAssembly is delivered. However, starting with .NET 6, we're making available an option to do ahead-of-time compiling. That's going to result in some larger DLLs, but significant improvements on performance. Native speeds inside the browser. However, it's going to also mean larger downloads. So you're going to face this trade-off. It's an interesting world we live in, just being in the middle of year 2 of Blazor with WebAssembly. We expect it to get better as the browsers advance, as our Blazor technology advances. But right now, it's not quite as fast as those other technologies. But you're going to be just as productive as you would be building with C# on a server or inside of another application, because you're using the exact same C# technology that you're comfortable with, maybe building with WinForms, WPF, Xamarin, ASP.NET. You're using the exact same technology, just running in a Blazor framework.
Wow, okay. That was a good explanation. Thank you.
Oh, cool.
So what is the difference between a Blazor server and MVC?
So there's actually not that much of a difference. Blazor server is another type of ASP.NET workload that gets installed into our server-side application. In fact, if you take a look at the Blazor server template that we have here, and I open this up, you'll see some .cshtml files here. Because in fact, there we go. Thank you. I was pointing to things before we were screen sharing. So you see host CSHTML, you see error CSHTML. These are razer views. These are razer pages being presented. And you can add in controllers. You can add in the MVC capabilities in your startup class, just like we're used to seeing. Right now, I've only added razer pages, but there's nothing saying that I can't add views and controllers in here, right? I can add that capability if I want to and run it side by side. Have Blazor handle some interactions, have MVC handle other interactions. It's up to you how you want to mix and match those things. And you can see down here where it maps the endpoints. It's set up routing. It's set up a fallback page here that it's going to go to if the Blazor hub doesn't know how to respond to things. But we're going to default to this host page and present and render our Blazor content from there. So I can add in those other features if I'd like. It's the same ASP.NET server in both situations.
So you could potentially mix and match depending on the outcome that you were trying to get.
Absolutely. Yep.
Great. And I'll ask just one more question on a similar MVC side, and then we'll get going. But don't worry, keep asking your questions. We have folks in the chat who are answering, and we'll also make sure to take more time to get some more questions answered.
Absolutely.
So can you run a Blazor server app hosted inside of an MVC app?
Can you run a Blazor server app hosted inside of an MVC app? Well, you could run those as one application. I'm not sure why you'd want to run two applications, right? I can add, right? This is an MVC app here, so I can add, where is it? Add controllers with views. And now this has all the MVC capabilities.
Gotcha.
So you can start to assemble these, like all the little Lego pieces that you want to put together to make your application with the various parts that you need. Razer pages, controllers, views, server-side Blazor, they're all available to you.
Gotcha. So I can mix Blazor into my already existing app, is what you're saying. Amazing. Okay. Well, that's the answer I wanted to hear, Jeff.
Yeah.
Amazing. Okay, well, let's move a little bit forward with our workshop here.
Yeah.
We're still taking questions, so please feel free to answer those in the chat or ask those questions in the chat.
All right.
Amazing.
So we were over here and I was looking at this counter and I wanted to enhance this a little bit, make it behave a little bit differently depending on how I reference and use the counter. So let me go back over to Visual Studio, and we saw in my index, I just have counter here. I'd really like to be able to provide an attribute like the title here to be able to specify, well, how do you want to increment your counter, right? It'd be really cool to be able to say increment by and have it do something with that information. So let's go back over to the counter. And I'm going to add a property here called increment by. All right. And we'll make that a property with get set, and we'll default it to 1. We're going to increment by default by 1. And I'm going to change this here to say plus equals increment by. So now when I click this button, it's going to increment by whatever the value of this property is. Now, in order to get that property assigned from outside of this component, from outside of this page, I need to decorate it with an attribute. And that's the parameter attribute. So this tells Blazor this property is a parameter that can be assigned from a tag outside of this file. So I'll save that. And if I go back over to index razer, I can start typing increment by, and now Visual Studio has already picked up and said, oh, I know what increment by is. It's an integer. And you see it even gives us the little @ sign here to show and tell us this is a Blazor C# property that you're going to set. And I'm going to set that to 5. Now, then all my red lines go away and it knows that's a proper integer to work with. If I were to type 5, it knows that that's
It wouldn't like that very much.
No, that's not going to work. So I'll change that to 5, save that, and behind the scenes, my page is actually rebuilding here. And look, it's gotten all grouchy because I typed in 5 there. But I will go back over here, refresh. Oh no, what have I done? Increment by. We're going to force a refresh of this. There we go.
Oh, whoops. Yeah,
No
it did
worries,
not
no
like
worries.
it did not like that spelt out 5.
Right? I purposely put a bug in there and it recompiled and got stuck.
Bugged out.
So Control R inside of the terminal will force it to refresh when you run .NET Watch. So here I now told it increment by 5s, and it increments by 5s. If I go over to the counter page, there was no way for me to pass in an increment by value. So I had that default to 1. So now this counts up by 1s. So I have now 2 different ways I'm using the same component, but I'm altering its behavior because I can pass in a parameter and make it behave differently when I need to. So this is kind of one of the fundamental ideas of using components and composing our application by reusing those components and changing their behavior inside of parent components or parent pages when they're requested. So the next bit we're going to get here is going to be about data binding and working with events.
Ooh,
so
fun.
Do we have any questions to get into before I start showing and walking through this bit?
Yeah, I do actually have a few questions.
Fantastic.
So is there a way to do multiple routes for navigating?
Fantastic question. Yes. So let's go back over here. I had page counter up here. I can actually add multiple here if I want to have it listen and respond to different addresses. So I can have it also listen to not just counter, but we can say Fritz's wonder number incrementer, whatever it might be, right? Save that, and you'll see it's refreshing the browser over here. I don't have to just go to /counter. Now, if I go up here and I put /Fritz's wonder number incrementer, it still goes to that same counter page.
Okay, so it reroutes to the correct location.
Exactly. It knows, because of this page directive here, it's registered, it's logged with the runtime. Hey, I know how to answer for this address also.
Amazing.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So I know you get this question a lot, but I still believe there's probably some clarity around it.
Sure, go ahead.
Are Blazer and Razer the same, or are they different?
That's a good question, and it is a question we get a bit. Blazer and Razer are similar. Razer is a templating engine and language that we use with ASP.NET and ASP.NET Core. Typically with MVC, we'll also see it with Razer Pages, that uses this syntax to embed content and to pivot back and forth between HTML and C#, right? I can put entries in here that say things like if current count is less than 5, and by putting braces around this, the curly brackets, when the value is less than 5, it'll output, and we'll be able to see that button. And if I go back over to my page here, well, it's 5. We can't see the button. I'll refresh. And when I click, it increments, and as soon as it goes over 5, it disappears. So that same interaction with block level statements, if, for, while, those all work just fine interacting back and forth inside of our code here. And I can also output information from properties, fields, and whatnot. The enhancement that Blazer has is I can also then start decorating HTML tags with things like @onClick, this event handler here, and I can bind values back and forth, two-way bind values, not just into HTML as some text that we're going to output, but as values into a text box, and we're going to see that in a little bit here. So not just a text box, what am I saying? Into any input element that HTML will render, we can bind values back and forth. So we get this next level of interaction with the HTML. Additionally, not only do we have the ability to add parameters and methods like this inside of a code block in Blazer, and we have a functions block we can use inside of our Razer templates that's very similar, doesn't support parameters quite like this, but in Blazer, we also get the ability to pass around some other types of parameters and interact with the state of our application a little bit differently. Finally, both Razer and Blazer have the ability to handle dependency injection. So if we take a look at the last page that I haven't shown over here yet, the fetch data sample, you'll see it injects a weather forecast service. This is declared elsewhere in my application, and it's being injected. It's being made available to this page, to this fetch data Razer file, as a weather forecast service type named, it's a variable named forecast service. And further down here, you can see it calls into the forecast service and says, well, get me the forecasts for today going forward. So
it pulls the data.
Exactly. We're injecting this service that was defined elsewhere in the application. Go pull that data and up here,
bring it here,
display it.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And how do I set up authentication for my Blazer application?
Oh, that is a
Loaded
much more
question.
complicated answer for that. There is an authentication template that comes with the .NET SDK that you can check out. We recommend folks set up with identity. And you'll see when you use that template exactly how it lays things out and hands things off to a server component that will process and return appropriate tokens that can be used in the browser. That's a bit more advanced than we want to cover as part of this session, but thank you. I see Docs on Authentication was shared into chat. Absolutely something you can check out. And gosh, check out our friends on the 425 show over on Twitch. They broadcast on the Visual Studio channel. You'll see their content go up on YouTube as well. They cover all of these topics and all of the nitty-gritty around authentication very well over there on their show. There is documentation available as well.
Amazing. Yeah, this is an intro course to Blazor, but we have tons of resources for taking you on to the next step for Blazor.
Oh yeah.
I'll ask just a couple more questions before we get going.
Sure.
So this is all web-based. Can I use Blazor to build mobile apps?
Spoiler alert! Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I'm coming in rough with the questions.
So yes, of course you can build progressive web apps with Blazor with WebAssembly now, and works great. Installs on your phone, on your tablet. But coming up in November with the next version of .NET, we're calling it .NET 6. We're shipping a framework called .NET Maui, and .NET Maui has the ability to host Blazor components and render those inside of a mobile application, a native application on Windows, Mac, iOS, and Android. Really cool stuff. More info in that in November when Maui is released.
Is launched and live. Excellent.
But it's great, Jamie, because everything you're learning today you can use to build.
Applicable.
Yeah. So it's a good starting point, and I love that you can reuse that learning across different form factors and operating systems.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is the preface to being able to build mobile applications with Razer come November.
Yeah.
So last question before we move on a little bit.
Sure.
So how does Blazor handle a graceful degradation? I'm sorry.
Degradation.
Handle graceful degradation on connections, and does it limit connections?
So I think what they're referencing is if I'm over here and I'm using Blazor server, and if I've made my connection, excuse me, and it's returned and I'm interacting with WebSockets over here, what happens if I don't have WebSockets available, or if the WebSocket goes away? This is built on top of a technology called SignalR. And SignalR is an ASP.NET technology that's been around for, 10 plus years now. In its current iteration, SignalR with .NET Core, what you're able to do is use SignalR to automatically step down from the preferred connection mechanism, WebSockets, to other technologies that will render and maintain that connection between your server and the browser. So it'll use some things like server sent events, forever frame, log polling. If it really needs to get to that, it'll actually poll every few seconds to see if there's updates. And all of that is managed for you inside of SignalR. And what really makes SignalR important for us to consider, instead of just setting up a WebSocket connection and using that, is SignalR provides that abstraction over all of these technologies and automatically steps down. So when HTTP vNext comes out, right? We know HTTP 3 is on the horizon, but if there's some new technology that's being delivered that's going to give you a better two-way communication, we're going to adapt and put that into SignalR so that you can use that as the preferred way to communicate back and forth. Now, there's nothing on the agenda that we really need to push in yet. But if at some point in the future that whatever technology comes up, I don't know, carrier pigeons over HTTP, I don't know what it might be, and that's better, faster for folks to use, you keep using SignalR and we'll switch over to carrier pigeons over HTTP for you when it's available.
Amazing. Yes. Okay, so let's go ahead. I know you have a lot to show us, Jeff. So
sure,
you want to?
I've got time.
Yeah.
Plenty
Okay.
of time.
Excellent.
So let's
go ahead.
what do you say we get into the next bit here about data binding and events.
Yeah, let's go for it. If
All right.
everybody's ready, I'm ready.
Cool. So I want to build that prototypical to-do list. Every application, every web framework, when they want to show off, hey, look at how cool my framework is, they want to build a to-do list, right? It's a pretty standard sample that folks build and work with. So let's build a new razer component to be our to-do page. So I'm going to go over here into Visual Studio. Now there's a command line. There's a command you can run at the command line that'll build this for you. I'm going to do this in Visual Studio because it's real easy for me to add a new razer component. It's going to load up my templates here, and I'm going to change this to my to-do razer file. And I end up with to-do as a header, code, and nothing. All right, that's all that's here. But I want this to be a page, so I need to decorate it with a page, and we'll listen to the address /to-do.
So just to make sure we don't lose anybody following along, is this the next Learn module?
This is still in the same Build Web App with
Okay.
Blazer Learn module. This is Unit 7 that I'm going through.
Okay,
so
perfect.
I've specified here's the page where we're listening, where it's going to present this, the route for it with the page directive here. Let's go over and create a navigation element for this. So I haven't shown this page yet. This component yet. This is the navigation menu that appears down the left side over here. So there's the home button, there's the counter button, there's the fetch data. I'm going to put right here next to counter. I'm just going to copy this, paste it again. I'm going to change the label from counter to to-do. And the href, the navigation that we're going to, I'm going to change this to to-do as well. So now I have a navigation link here. Navigation link runs very much like a normal anchored hyperlink in HTML. I'm able to click this, and it'll go to the to-do page. So if I go back over, there, it already has been refreshed. There's my to-do page. Click that, and there's nothing here. What happens is that watch process, it needs to refresh when you add a new file. It doesn't always pick up all new files all the time. So now there's my to-do page. So let's start building a to-do item and creating some list of objects that we're going to bind to. So I'm going to go back over here, and inside my data folder, yeah, we'll do it in the data folder. I'm going to create a new class, and I'm going to call this to-do item. So this is a regular C# class. There it is. Let's create two properties in here. I'll use the prop snippet to help get through this a little bit quicker. And I have a title to my to-do item and a is done property, because I want to know if I've completed some of these things, right? Now I can go back over to to-do razer, and let's define a collection of to-do items that we're going to interact with. So private list to-do item, and we'll call those to-dos, and I'm going to use a little C#9, a new initializer right there. And that is, I need a using statement. There we go. And I can put using statements inside of my templates, inside of my components, I'm sorry, using the same using syntax that I would inside of a class file. I just have to prefix it with an @ sign so that Blazor knows, oh, that's C#. All right, so I've got a new list of to-dos, and let's just output a list of these. That's not the right tag. An unordered list. There we go. So this is going to do a little for each, and I'm not going to get the, that's fine. Var to-do in my to-dos list, and let's output a list item that is that to-do title. If I go back over, there's nothing being output yet because, well, I don't have anything being added to the list. So let's put a text box here so we can add something into our to-do list. I'll go back to Visual Studio. Down here, I'm going to create an input. Let's put a placeholder in here that says do something. To do something, right? And I'll add a button that says add to do. Okay, save that. And we should check over here, refresh my content. There it is. Now I've got my content here, but I need to wire that up so that this text box actually goes somewhere, right? Learn Blazer, and this doesn't do anything. So we need to write a little bit of code so that it actually does something with that. So here we go. We're going to set up an event handler for this button so that when you click the button, there you can see a bunch of the events pop up in Visual Studio that you can choose. And I'll let you scroll through this on your own time if you want to take a look at some of those. And I'll add a call add to do. We just define a method down here. Cool. So this red line will go away because it now sees that there's a method. All right. But I need to get the string for that to do that we want to add to this. What's that text for this? So I'm going to use binding, and I'm going to bind this to, well, let's create something called new to do, right? Which sounds kind of weird. New to do. Okay. Sounds like something that would be in a kid's TV show. Private string new to do equals string empty. There it goes. So this now is going to go away. We'll see that red disappear. There we go. And I want to add, when there is a value here, I want to add it into our collection. Fantastic. We can do that. So if string is null or empty, new to do, return, right? Do a little bit of validation there. Otherwise, let's say to-dos, add new to-do item. There it is. And it is title equals new to-do. And I'll clear out my new to-do. So it's ready for you to start typing the next thing. All right. If we do have text in the new to-do field, and we're binding, we're getting that two-way binding here. So if there's anything in this text box, when it changes, so when the cursor leaves the text box, it's going to copy it into this field. And when you click this button, it's going to fire the on-click operator. It's going to wake up that C# method called add to do and execute. Inspect that value, create a to-do item, and add it to my list. And then clear out the input. It sets the property back to string empty. And because it's bound here, here's that two-way binding. Coming back the other way, when we set that to empty, it resets this, and this value sees the change and updates and clears the text box for us. I'll head back over and refresh. So now if I start keying in, learn Blazer, and it's not updating. Why isn't it updating? What did I do? What did I miss? Let's take a look.
What did we miss?
Am I missing a file or something here? Let me restart the application just to make sure I'm not missing something. There we go. And back over to Edge, to do. There it is.
There we go.
So I just had to restart that. There was a file that was out of sync, and I'm using a preview version of .NET, so that happens sometimes. So watch more .NET videos. Need to do that. That's a thing. So, and I can build this out with whatever I'd like, right? So we're actually somewhere here that's kind of cool. We're somewhere that, right, we can build a very simple list, but if I want to mark these things as done, perhaps, or I want to be able to edit the text of some of these things, I can go back into Visual Studio and we can update that presentation from not just a list item here, but we can turn that into a text box as well. So let's do that real quick. Input, And we're going to bind, and this time we're going to bind to the to-do title right here. Come on. Thank you. And not input checkbox. What the? I'm sorry. There we go.
There we go.
And that's what I was expecting. Now, I also want to put a checkbox next to this. And I'm going to use just a regular HTML checkbox. So we know how to use that. It's input type equals checkbox. And we're going to bind something different to this. We're going to bind the, I don't need the at in front. To do is done. So now it'll know and bind this is done value from inside each one of our to-do items in that collection. I'll go back over here, and now I've got a checkbox with that text. And the text isn't going anywhere. So it's not that big a deal just yet. Okay. But in that checkbox, I can actually filter on that and say, well, how many items do I have left? Let's put a little note next to the to-do here. And let's put the number remaining, right? So we'll say something remaining. Well, I can use a little bit of link here to output that information. So I can say to-dos.count, and I can put a little where clause in here, where the to-do is not done. So I've got a little link query right there that we're going to bind and output next to the text remaining. So now if I go back over here, one remaining. It already updated that. And when I check it off, none remaining. Watch more .NET videos, right? Subscribe to my podcast. I don't have a podcast. You get the point. I'm able to add these, check them off, and it binds and updates the HTML text appropriately. And these fields are interacting with that C# code and updating our user interface immediately. And that's all happening, in this case, on the server and being painted on the screen for us. The exact same interaction, the exact same content components works with Blazor WebAssembly.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. And I noticed that you edited the text on the visual representation side. Now, will that reflect in your source code?
When I edit which text?
You added WebAssembly, learn WebAssembly Blazor.
Oh,
will that actually reflect back?
No, because that's a to-do item. It's a data point that we created, so it's sitting in memory only on this page. So when I refresh, it goes away.
Ah, okay, I see.
Yeah. So how we doing out there? Any questions?
Yeah, how's everyone doing?
There was a lot.
Yeah, that was a lot. That was amazing. How would you persist data in an app?
Good question.
Like, keep it coming.
So if we wanted to save that to-do list, if we wanted to put it somewhere so that it was persisted, so that we could come back to it later, what you would do is you would put it in one of two places. You could put it in the browser using application state. Now, that'll stick in whoever's browser is currently running, and it won't follow them into other browsers on the same machine, onto other browsers on other devices. So you don't have that persistent and being shared with other folks. The other way to persist it would be to update and send it to an API endpoint. Now, I showed briefly over here, there's the weather forecast in the fetch data over here. The weather forecast service that's being injected here, it could use an HTTP client to fetch data from a web API endpoint, from an Azure function endpoint, an Azure API endpoint, but it can also post and put data at those endpoints as well. And whatever technology you're using to build those HTTP APIs will save and persist appropriately. So you then inject and interact with those using, in Blazor WebAssembly, you're going to use an HTTP client. In Blazor Server, well, your server is running inside the firewall on your own data center or in your own cloud application space. So you can reference and have that interact with your database directly in the case of running on Blazor Server. So it's up to you how you implement those, but the same inject of those services that you want to use to persist is a good model that we recommend folks use.
Okay. Akeem from YouTube says that he would subscribe to your podcast, so that you should start one.
Well, I'm gonna have to start one.
So can I use databases with tech like EF Core and any
For sure.
framework?
Absolutely. That's absolutely one of the models that we recommend folks check out, because building APIs with Entity Framework Core, very easy to do. There's great courses, there's great modules on Microsoft Learn that'll walk through building APIs with Entity Framework Core that you can be very successful very quickly with. And once you have those APIs available to update and interact with that data using an HTTP client, very easy to do.
Good to know. Can you explain a little bit like how exactly the data binding works? Do we need to use an at or no at?
The data binding. So inside here, right? So we're binding data to this this checkbox. You have to use an @ sign in front of the bind attribute name so that the Blazor runtime knows that this is a C# directive. Otherwise, it might think it's HTML, something that JavaScript is going to pick up on and relay that to the browser, right? So if I remove the @ sign, you see it changes from that turquoise back to a light blue, and it takes the bold decoration off of it as well to indicate that the editor thinks this is HTML, that it's going to send directly to the browser. It's not going to tinker with it and interact with it. So you need the @ sign here, and you see Visual Studio is helping us out here to
the predictive text.
Yeah, the IntelliSense pops up, and this will instruct the Blazor runtime to pick up and execute what's happening with it. You don't need an @ sign in front of this, in front of what you're binding, because the very nature of using the @bind here is telling the Blazor runtime that this is a C# statement. It is a C# property or a field that we're connecting to and interacting with.
Okay, so that @ symbol is pretty important there.
Yep, that's how we tell the razer templating language, which then gets picked up by Blazor, that this is C#.
Yes, Blazor binding is a bit like magic. Who doesn't love magic?
Absolutely.
So you mentioned this a little bit before, but maybe you could clarify a little bit.
Sure.
How do you call a web API from Blazor WebAssembly?
So if I wanted to actually execute and interact with that web API endpoint, several things you have to do. Now, this is a Blazor server application. When you're in Blazor WebAssembly, the template has a little bit more set up for you from the get-go, but I will step through and show you the pieces that you need if you wanted to call a microservice, perhaps, from your Blazor server application. You need to add an HTTP client so it knows how to interact with that. Making that injectable here. This is an ASP.NET Core thing. It's made available for you immediately inside of a WebAssembly application. That's comes by default with the template. Back over now inside of my to-do, if I wanted to interact, I can inject that HTTP client, and I can call it whatever I want here. Foo, Fritz's web fetch thing, whatever. Some folks like to call it fetch. I like to just call it HTTP because it's a reminder to me that when I use this thing, it's actually making a request across Hypertext Transfer Protocol. So if I scroll down here inside of my add to do here, if I wanted to go and not just add it to my to-dos list here, if I wanted to actually update and send it somewhere else, I type HTTP dot, and now I can specify all the things that I may want to do with this, right? So I could send it and structure a request that I want to send out to whatever endpoint that you want to transfer your data to, right? There's helper methods like post, so I can specify here's the content that I want to post to this other location. We've even got helper methods that are available in in another assembly that isn't referenced by this project just yet, but it is available in the WebAssembly project that will allow you to post as JSON and specify an object that you want to post to that other location. I can also get data from other locations. So if I want to get a string from some URL, I can specify that here. Come on now. There we go. Right, and I can go fetch that from whatever location. Fingers aren't working. There we go. Go fetch the string from the front of c#fritz.com and do something with that, right? Wait that, and I'll put a async task on this. And now I'm going to go get that string and do something with it. Whatever you want to do, it's now available to you to fetch and interact with on your page. So lots you can do once you have that HTTP client in your page. So
Gotcha. So there are routes for the to-do list, but how do you pass parameters?
So we passed a parameter into our counter by using this parameter attribute, and that allowed me to set that parameter here on the tag. But I think what they're asking is, how do you pass a parameter into the to-do page so that this starts with something, right?
Yeah.
So let me actually do that over on the counter page, because I think it'll be a little bit clearer with Fritz's Wonder Number Incrementer. I can actually specify a starting count if I wanted by adding information to the route here. So I can specify starting count, and this is the way we specify elements that we want to capture inside of our route using ASP.NET Core, and the technology carries over into Blazor as well. So I want to capture a starting count, and I can specify that we want to capture that. It's not going to do that for me, is it? Starting count, and let's default that to 0, and that's going to be a property for us to interact with. Now, in order for this element from the route to be passed down and captured on here, we use the exact same parameter attribute to pass that along. Last thing, well, you know what? I need to, after this is received, I need to pass that into the current count. So I'm going to hook and interact with one of the events, one of the 3 events that are on every Razer component. And this one is on initialized async, and it's actually going to return a task. I'm not going to do anything asynchronous in this, but I'm going to show it to you. So I'm just going to say current count equals starting count. And actually, I did that wrong. That's the wrong event to hook. My bad. I'm sorry. We want on parameters set is the one I want. On initialized fires when the component is initialized, when it's created. On parameters set, I forgot the override. On parameters set async will trigger when the parameters like these are configured. Now, why am I getting on parameters set async? Yeah. Why am I getting?
It doesn't like that.
Oh, I'm not returning a value. That's fine. Return task completed task. This is what happens when I go off script, Jamie. Live coding at its finest. So now that starting count will be picked up and passed into this value. And after that value is set, it's going to set the current count to that value. One last thing we need to do. By default, route parameters like this one that are captured off of the address bar are assumed to be strings. So just like in the ASP.NET Core, I can put a constraint on here and specify this is an integer. So now, when I execute this, and it should already be executing, I'll go back over to counter. It says current count is equals 0, but if I go up here and I specify a different number to start with, say 100, now it starts with 100. It's captured that value and passed it into the current count value there on the address bar. And if I try and make this something else, /foo, it doesn't know what to do with foo. Foo is not a number, so it routes to the...
nothing.
Yeah, I don't know what to do with that thing. So make it whatever value, and it jumps right through.
Gotcha.
So there you go. There's how you work with parameters from the address bar.
I see. So a bunch of people have actually asked, is it possible to separate your code from your Razer page?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Let's do that real quick. So here in the counter, right, I've now got a whole bunch of logic here. And Jamie, I don't know about you, but when I start to see more than one page down of code, I get nervous, right? There's a lot of code there, and when I page down this other stuff that's up at the top, and Visual Studio is showing me a little bit of the outline here. It's like gone from memory for me. I'd rather it be somewhere else. It's a little bit easier for me to manage. So what you can do is you can move all of this code into another file. I can right-click on code here, making sure that this is available. I don't see it. If I look at the refactorings, there we go. I can move this whole code block to a code behind. Check this out. I'm going to click that. It creates a class. Let me show it in Solution Explorer here so you can see the whole enchilada. So I have counter.razer, and it creates another class. The class is in the same folder, in that pages folder. For the purposes of making it easy to see the relationship, we nest it in the tree here inside of counter razer. So you have counter razer CS, and it is a class. It's a regular C# class that has all of those code entries right here, but this is a partial class. It's a partial class because, as we can in C#, we can break up our classes across multiple files. So that component that we had, the counter.razer file, let me jump back into that real quick. Counter.razer is over here. Now it just has my markup. Now this is just my HTML, and it's one page down. I don't even have a page down. It's the full page, but I have all of my code for that over here. This is a partial class because at runtime, what's going to happen is the Blazer runtime, not the Blazer runtime, I'm sorry, the C# compiler is going to merge these two halves of the same class. The HTML, it's going to render, it's not HTML, the Razer template, it's going to, which is HTML and C#, it's going to render into a C# class that knows how to present this content and merge it with this content that we wrote. So you get the exact same output, the exact same behavior, but for our human eyes that need to juggle this content separately, you want to be able to see and interact with these a little bit cleaner. I can move this into a new vertical tab group. And for the purposes of me working in Visual Studio, I can zoom out, and now I can see both my markup and all of my code that supports it side by side, and be able to work with it a little bit easier when that concept count inside of my application starts going up. You don't need to do this. There are folks who prefer to have all of the features and language capabilities inside of one file, and those are a lot a lot of folks in the React ecosystem are used to doing that with JSX files. That's great. You can do that if you'd like, but if you'd like to separate it out like this, this option is available for you as well. There is no right answer for this. It's strictly a matter of comfort and what makes you happy and how you build your applications. So I will put them back together in one doc there.
Beautiful. Absolutely beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
So we have a little bit more than about a half hour left, and I
All
want to
right.
make sure that we can get to this next workshop.
Yeah.
Is everybody ready to move forward?
What do we think? The next part here, where we're actually going to write a little bit of WebAssembly.
Yes. So pushing a Blazor WebAssembly app and a .NET API with Azure Static Web Apps.
Yeah. So this is, let me
Yeah, it's like
change over.
they have the actual module.
Yeah, let me jump into that Learn module. Here we go.
Yep.
Publish a Blazor WebAssembly. Yeah.
Perfect. For those of us following along, this is the second workshop in the agenda. You could follow along online, or you can watch us do it right here.
Yeah.
Oh, and it seems like everybody in the chat's ready.
Fantastic. All right. So we built with Blazor Server, and Blazor Server means that there's some service hanging out there, whether it's on Azure Cloud, somebody else's cloud, in your data center, that's running and executing on a machine, on a server somewhere. But when we run with Blazor WebAssembly, we can actually have that deliver and run just in the browser. So then all of our content, all of what we build and work with actually lives in and runs somewhere else. It's just hosted on the cloud. It doesn't actually have any moving parts on the cloud. So that's actually a little bit more interesting to work with, because we can start to drive down our web costs by running less active code on a server. So how does that work? How do we interact with that? And that's where this module comes in, using the Azure Static Web Apps technology. So let's get in, let's take a look at what this module is all about. So Azure Static Web Apps is a way for you to publish your code to GitHub or Azure DevOps pipelines, but you publish your code out to Azure DevOps repository, but we prefer using GitHub for this module. And as your code changes, we're going to give you continuous integration, continuous delivery set up with GitHub Actions, and automatically deploy that to a location on Azure for all of your static content, your HTML, images, JavaScript, CSS, your Blazor application, your Blazor WebAssembly application. And if you need some server-side interactions, we'll give you an API that runs on top of Azure Functions that lives out there, you can manage with C#. And even better, we can deliver all of this in the same solution file for you to be able to interact with and build your application. So let's take a look at what we're going to build here. We're going to build just a simple shopping list that is going to persist in the cloud, and we're going to be able to interact with using Blazor WebAssembly. So
Everybody needs a good list app.
Right. We did our to-dos. Let's get that shopping list app together.
Yes.
So the first thing that we need to do is we need to start from a template. We need to get all the pieces together to build this. Now, there is a template page that's made available for us, and it wants me to sign into GitHub. That's fine. And there we go. All signed in. This is going to go to C#Fritz/ some repository name. So let's call this Let's Learn Blazor. All right. So that's my GitHub repository that I'm creating. I'm going to make this a public repository and create repository from this template. Now, this template is going to be created from Microsoft Docs, MS Learn, Static Web App, .NET. Now, this is set up specifically for this Learn module that we're working through. If you're building some other application and you need to be able to build from a generic starter application, there is another URL that you can use. And I'm going to share that for our moderators to be able to reference. But let me navigate to this so you can see. This is github.com static web dev Blazor-starter. And this will give you a very plain, almost identical to the template we saw in the last Learn module application to build from. You click use this template, and that same dialog pops up that we just saw. Create a new repository from this, and it'll give you a jumping off point to build your application. So let's take a look at what's inside this application. I've got 3 folders: API, client, and data. And when we take a look at this, it kind of makes sense that I'll have an API that's going to be my Azure Functions. I've got a client. This is my Blazor WebAssembly app, and you see the same folders in here that we had in the Blazor server app: pages, root, some shared content, some properties, program CS, CS project file. Kind of makes sense. I know what these things are. So let's bring this down locally and try running the code on my machine. So I'm going to click the download code and get the URL for this, jump back into Windows Terminal, close that application down, go up a folder, and let's clone it. I'm a big fan of the command line, so I do everything at the command line here. I guess I'm a keyboard jockey like that. Right?
But that's a preference, though. I think
absolutely
you could do either. Yeah.
Yep. I'm going to copy that file folder location and go back to Visual Studio, and let's open a new solution. I'm going to start at that location and open shopping list SLN. Sure, go ahead, save that. Sure, go ahead, save that. That's from the previous demo that we were looking at. So we take a look at this: API, client, and data. And I can set this up and run this application locally here. Now, there's actually 2 parts to this. There's an API and client. So I'll want to run, I believe I want to run both of them at the same time. Nah, let's just run the client first. So I'll click start here, and it should start up in my browser after it builds. And we will get the application running locally here.
So succeeded.
So succeeded. I got the spinner, and
it's loading. There we go.
And
almost.
No, it opened in my other browser over here.
Oh, okay. I was like, this should be displaying something.
yeah, it just opened in the other browser. So I'm going to go to localhost, and it's in 44348. And it's on /products. Oh, I forgot the HTTPS. Pardon me. There it is. See, it says loading. That's Blazor WebAssembly starting up. And there it is in the browser. All right, so I've got products and I've got my list, and it says loading data because it should try to load data from my server. If we take a look back at the contents of this, right? So we went to /products. So there it is, /products. It's injecting an HTTP client. It's got a navigation manager right there so that it can help with navigation around our application. And I've got some components that are being referenced here and how it interacts with things. And to the question we had earlier, how do I get data from somewhere else? There you go. When we initialize this page, we're going to get data in JSON format. That's a collection of products from API/products. So not bad. I see how we're going to get that data, and it's not loading that data yet.
Здравейте отново. За съжаление, нашето време е ограничено и се налага да приключим с това предаване. Благодаря ви много за това, че се включихте. Благодаря много също така на Data Art за това, че направиха всичко, за да имаме това хубаво събитие и на живо, и на всички участници. До скоро и ще се видим през следващите седмици с нови събития. През януари ние имаме AI Bootcamp, така че следете информацията, която има по нашите канали за конференциите през следващата година.